Okay, perfect. All right, one last food announcement. If you're going to eat Splunk's free food, you need to sign my board. If you're not going to eat, then you don't need to sign it. You can remain anonymous. I'd still like to meet you, though, before you go, if we haven't met. My name's... Yeah, I don't know that they... I don't know what they do with this. But anyway, marketing is entitled to this. I just send them a snapshot. It's not very legible. I don't type it in. I just send them a picture of this. So they probably will. If you don't write well, they won't bother you. Anyway, my name's Greg Woodcock. I'm with Splunkster, a boutique Splunk consultancy. We get around. We do big projects. We do small projects. But this isn't about me. This project that we're going to talk about, I briefly announced it last week. I would like to qualify what this is and what this isn't before I introduce Daniel and his team. This is a project that is envisioned to help the analysts. This is all about the analysts. The people behind the project, they're not trying to make $1 million. They're not trying to kick anybody else out of the market. They're not trying to displace any competitors. What the goal of this project is to make sure that the analyst's job is as easy, as automated, and as frictionless as possible. Because that is, you guys, I don't know how many of you guys are analysts, but the analysts are the backbone of InfoSec, and they got way too much to do, and it's way too hard to do it. And so this is an attempt to bring a multi-tenancy, multi-vendor platform where you can come into this platform and you can do more with it more easily than you can being in your native platform, whether it's Splunk or Logarithm or whatever the other things. They're starting with Splunk. Start with the best product out there, which is Splunk. So this isn't a dig against Splunk. It wouldn't work without Splunk. They're starting with Splunk. It isn't a dig against ES. ES is great. It's just a different way to look at the same kinds of things that all these products do, but this has both easier automation layer, and it's also done with an artistic flair. So that's kind of my role into Artisans Collaborative. Artisans Collaborative is a small team of full stack developers, and their niche is they do things beautifully. So they're not just going to make, like you might say, some of you guys might be using Alert Manager. It's a functional thing, right? But you would never say it's beautiful. You would never say, oh, it's really smooth. Like I enjoy every minute I spend in there. It's a it's what I would build. A highly functional thing using only the tools that are right there, right? It works, right? But so their approach is completely different. They want something that's actually pleasing to the eye, that's more fun to use. So they have the artist perspective on it, and I think you'll see that. They're a small team, but they're not a small company. I don't know if you guys have seen the Smart Safe. It's at Best Buy, and you can get it on Amazon. These guys are the guys that did the Smart Safe. If you've seen that product, you can look it up. They built the entire back end for that. Anyway, they get around, and this is their first project in the security space. And what's interesting is they came at it from, they didn't go look at any of the other products. They just said, we get the concept. Everybody kind of does, right? We're going to take an artistic shot at it first. And that's what they've got here. So at this point, one of the things that they're looking to do is find some analysts to help them drive it more directly into your workflow, right? So this is sort of an imaginative first pass at what they think you would like to do, but they really want to get with some analysts. So if you want to help get this thing moving to where you can't live without it, you can talk to Daniel and you can sign up. They're looking for some early alpha guys to come in and start using this and help them make it what it should be. But so it's very much, we build this as a sneak peek. It is a sneak peek. It's not a finished product. It's not ready for people to use or buy, but it is ready for you to help influence to get it to where it's what it should be to make your job easier as an analyst. Remember, the concept here is this is for the analyst. This is to make your job easier. With that, I'm going to hand it off to Daniel. And I did record it. I had several people ask me to record it. That's why I'm doing this.
All right, well, it's good to meet you all. My name is Daniel. Help yourself to the food and everything while I'm talking. And I'm going to try and kind of give a pitch. I'm going to take a seat here, though, to do most of it. We're going to run through just what SIEMplicity is. He kind of set it all up. It is a software solution that we're trying to bring to the analysts to simplify your workflows. You know, the data is complex, the searches are complex, the tools that you have, they're very powerful, but they are still complex. And we're trying to find a solution that day one you could have a brand new analyst coming into a business, and if the business has already set up their workflows, their domain, their concepts of organizing business, then they should be able to just jump right in and start analyzing notables and investigating cases and closing them out, because that's at the end of the day, like Greg was saying, is analysts are really busy, they got a lot of things to do, so that's what SIEMplicity is striving to do. It is very early beta software, so we got some sort of a emergency alert system going on around here. The idea, though, is that it is very beta software, so you may see some bugs as we go through the live demo. Live demos are always fun for that. Laugh along with me when we come across them. But we are working towards getting our first official launch. The issue is that first we need to have a little bit of vocabulary, because if you're using anything other than Splunk, you might be coming here because you heard that this was something that can work with anything, not just Splunk. And that's true, but I'm going to give you an example of what SIEMplicity is on Splunk. You could have SIEMplicity on some sort of custom stack, on some sort of other program like Logarithm or Nagios, a lot of different solutions. It could even hook into something very basic like your actual syslogs. That's the idea behind SIEMplicity, is the data, where we get it from, we don't care, but we process it in a similar way. So with Splunk, you have Splunk Base, which is your marketplace. That's what we call it in SIEMplicity terms. So everybody familiar with Splunk Base, you install your apps and things like that. Search head, that's your connector. And so we define it as a connection. You have a front-end connection and you have a back-end connection, or your console connection and your back-end. Your console would be the web interface that you interact with Splunk back-end with, whereas basically the API connector is how the data is flowing through. And so if you didn't know it, Splunk has an entire RESTful API, and that's what we tap into under the hood. And so that gives us a lot of the power, but without all that UI that Splunk has. So we can do some things differently. And so if you've ever ran into an add-on like Alert Manager that didn't quite work the way you wanted it to, customizing it is really difficult. We take it and we make it really simple to customize those types of capabilities. Splunk has a terminology called an app, and so you have a lot of different apps installed. Apps have a lot of different meanings inside of Splunk. We treat the one meaning of it, and that is a workspace. It's a designated division, perhaps, of your company or of your team, your investigative team. It is a concept that you can just basically create a grouping of related notables. So these are all targeted or focused. These alerts are all targeted and focused on identifying specific things. So like a wire transfer division at a bank might be a workplace. Inside of Splunk right now, if you're using Alert Manager, which is like the #1 tool that a lot of people have installed, Alert Manager is single tenant, so you can only install it once per search head, or what we call a connector. So we actually allow you to install it multiple times, so you can actually have true multiple workspaces all dealing with related events. We store those events in collections, which are the KV store built into Splunk. We can also store that in a third party, so if you don't want your data being put back in, all those notables and alerts going back in there, but you have some other third-party troubleshooting solution, we push all that data wherever you want it. So we have it built in to where you can run this entire thing on a local machine. So I got it actually all running directly off of this computer here. You just install Splunk, you get the SIEMplicity app installed, you make the connection, and all the data is pushing right back into Splunk. So it's all actually still storing in Splunk. But again, if that's not where you want the data, you can put it wherever you like. Users, we call them analysts. This is not an admin tool per se. This is not something for system administrators to go and configure. There is plenty of configuration options available for the admin of this SIEMplicity installation, but it is actually designed for analysts. It's for the day-to-day people who are writing searches, trying to investigate and trying to figure out what's going on with all these notables that they're dealing with. So we call users analysts, and that's the analyst role that they have. Save searches inside of Splunk. If you ever created a search and you want to run that again, you save the search. You can save it on a schedule. You can save it ad hoc. But the idea is we call those alerts. And sometimes if you're using Alert Manager, there's kind of confusing terms. You might have heard of as a triggered alert or a fired alert or a fired search. There's a lot of different terms going on with inside of Splunk and other SIEM solutions. We call them alerts because that's what they do. They trigger alerts. Search jobs are the artifacts that those alerts create. So if you've ever performed a search, you get a job ID and that job exists for a little while. That's the same thing here. In our terms, though, a job is actually pushed into a queue, and we process that in the background doing some enhancements, which we'll get to in a few minutes. A result entry is a job contains multiple results, and each entry in that result set we call an individual result. So we're designing it around the idea that if you trigger a bunch of different rows in your search, your search gets ran and you come back with a bunch of different rows. Each row is an individual result, which creates an individual notable. And so it's a lot easier then to organize and keep track of what's going on. Triggered alerts inside of Splunk are what we call notables. And so they eventually go from an alert to a job and finally to a notable. And then the search fields are within the search results. You have these individual columns or fields. We call those entities. Because they get enriched at some point inside of SIEMplicity. So you might have an email address and it's just column email, or it's column email underscore address, or whatever names you give it. That's all fine. It all maps to a entity, some known business entity, a business concept, domain logic. So you might have credit card numbers, and you might have dates. You might have dates that are important compared to other dates that aren't important, like a date of birth is not quite the same thing as simply a date or a timestamp. So different pieces of information, different columns and fields, they have different meaning, and so we call those entities, and you can define those so you have more well-structured content. Queries and macros are used in a lot of searches. The closest analogy that we have with inside of SIEMplicity to that is schemas, but schemas are way, I won't say better, but they're way different. They're way more enhanced than just a simple macro. We actually use macros in our SIEMplicity app to process the data that's inside of Splunk, and that is based on a schema, and the schema enriches the data after the fact. Lookups are, if you're familiar with lookups with inside of Splunk, Splunk also has, well, at least ES has watch lists. We have watch lists, but they're slightly different. We'll get to that in a little bit. The closest thing to a watch list in our system is more or less a lookup. But there's one big thing that's missing, and that's missing in most solutions or back-end data providers like Splunk. And that's not to say that there's something wrong with Splunk. It's actually just, it's not the purview, it's not the design of Splunk to handle this. This is more a matter of your business, and that is rules. And so SIEMplicity has this concept of rules, and there's different takes on it. Alert Manager, for example, has their kind of take on it, and different add-ons that you can add to Splunk try to provide this sort of functionality, but it's always kind of a little off-putting, it's a little jarring. So within a workspace of SIEMplicity, and again, a workspace is a Splunk app, but we have lots of Splunk apps, so you can take any of the existing ones that you already have. You might even have Alert Manager installed, and so if you had Alert Manager installed, we could actually hook in directly to the events coming out of there. So that workspace concept, we then add to that rules, and a rule consists of an alert reference. So an alert is that saved search, remember? So if you had some query that's going to return some results on a scheduled cron, that's the alert. And so the alert references a schema and an entity, or a set of entities. And if you really think about it, the schema is more or less a grouping of different entities. You might have a phone number and a email address and a person's name and their actual billing address, which is an address, but then it's special type, it's also billing, versus shipping address, and maybe it's the origin address and the destination address. You might have all of these entities together. They form a schema, and the schema can have additional rules. So if I encounter a phone number and an email address and a person's name, let's kind of aggregate that together as a user profile. And so I might perform additional logic on the fact that it's a user profile. So schemas is kind of a hierarchy there. But each one of those creates a job for every result triggered by the search. So like I said earlier, you're running your scheduled searches, and they're running and firing off all those different jobs. Those jobs are artifacts, and they are collected by SIEMplicity on a regular basis. Again, everything's configurable. We try to make that, I'll probably say that a billion times throughout this demo. Everything's configurable. So if you want it to be on 5-minute reaping, or you want it to be minute reaping, our default is minute by minute it's reaping, because we're assuming you're generating lots of notables. But everything is tailored, custom made to what you need. So the jobs are getting reaped, and as they're getting reaped, they're being put back into SIEMplicity with inside the workspace. And so then the workspace rules can start taking effect, and they trigger additional logic to improve. So everybody who's got a search head installed, all your agents are connecting to the same server. You're all connecting to the same host. And so because of that, everybody, you probably don't have thousands and thousands of analysts unless you're a big team, but you do have a lot of traffic going into this one single search head. We separate that, and we have an actual desktop application. So we release you from the browser. You're not restricted to the browser and a million tabs having to be opened. We actually provide you native performance desktop apps directly on your operating system of choice. So if you're using Mac, Linux, or Windows, the app installs on all of them. It looks the same, so even if your team is using different systems, it all works exactly the same. But a worker is a background processor of the workspace. So in a few minutes, I'll show you the actual software demo. And in there, I'll open a window. And in the background, it's going to start processing all the jobs that are in the queue. So you say, what happens if there's nobody who's got the software open? No worries. SIEMplicity continues to put them into Splunk, continues to fire them into Splunk, and the first analyst that opens up the workspace, it starts systematically churning through all of those notables. If you need it to be running on a continuous basis 24/7, you never want to miss an alert, no problem. You can also run it from a command line in the background, so it's always working no matter what, even if there's not an agent available to connect into. So that worker, though, post-processes the job and transforms what would be just a simple result. So again, in your mind, think, I just ran a search in Splunk, I got all my results back, I got this row of data. Maybe it contains a phone number, an email address, an IP address, or something simple. Well, what if we could actually enhance the IP address to know what's the latitude, longitude coordinates for where it's actually geolocated? What's the city and state? Does that map to the same city and state as the shipping? Does that email address exist on a spam list or exist in some other blacklist or whitelist? So we start thinking about, why do I have to write a search query as an analyst that is really big and complicated to try and pull all this information from wherever it is, when it's already kind of well defined within my business that every time I have an email address, I'd like to know some details about that email. So now I can just write a search that only returns an email address, and SIEMplicity will automatically enrich it. It can perform regex validation on it based on the rules, and the risk assessment engine and the predictive analysis engine kick in. And so after the notable's actually been created, we can perform additional risk assessment. And we can determine, okay, well, is this email address on a blacklist? Well, if it is, maybe I should increase the risk score. But if I increase the risk score of the email address, do I also consider the fact that the phone number and the email address have been used together in some sort of order? So maybe I need to also go back to all the orders that involve those two things that are now assessed as a higher risk and reassess the risk on each of those too, as they're open notables or open cases that are still being resolved. So the real-time risk assessment engine kicks in to try and predictively analyze your data to figure out what's going on, and try and take a little bit of the cognitive workload off the analyst so you can actually focus on the things that only analysts can provide that machines can't. We use some machine learning and artificial intelligence to analyze your own behaviors within the application. So if we get it wrong as a system and we mark the notable as being high risk and severe, and you say, nah, it's not, you slap the system down, and the system says, okay, next time I'll get it right, and it learns your own behavior. It can also learn then who's the best person to be assigned a notable or a case. So if you have all of your analysts in the system, and this analyst seems to always take these types of cases or these types of things and resolves them in a certain way, they can predictively figure out this would be the best person to assign it to. And of course, that dramatically improves your workflow, because now you're not trying to chase down, maybe you got 5 minutes left on the clock and you're trying to figure out what can I do in the next 5 minutes. It'll know, here's the best thing for you to do. You got 5 minutes left on the clock. So there's a lot of different things built into this. And so we deal with the risk score, the severity, and priority as afterthoughts of the notable. Create notables, lots of notables. Notables are good. All the kinds of events that are going on within the system. And then let's analyze all of that together to see what the actual risk is. So another thing is that each workspace can be configured for threshold settings. So like I said, everything can be configured in this. So by default, we have this sort of inheritance structure going on of importance. And you can have multiple workspaces, and you can have rules set up within that workspace. So again, a rule is kind of a metadata on top of a search, and it's how the actual results are going to be processed. Your workspace can define thresholds like, if the risk score becomes 50, and again, these are kind of arbitrary numbers for your own business. You might use 500. You might use some other numbering system. But the idea is that if the system can identify your risk for this particular notable or this event is a score of 50, and that is got a threshold that if I hit a score of 50, we're going to create a notable. If I don't hit a score of 50, we're going to suppress the notable altogether. Or we could say that we always create the notable, but if it has this particular piece of information in it, then I'm going to increase the score. Those are sort of threshold settings. And you can configure them for each of the different severities. So we have eight levels of severity from debug all the way up to emergency. We just got the Amber Alert. That would be an emergency factor. So the idea would be that you have these alerts going off, and you can set the thresholds for what would trigger a certain severity. But priority is slightly different, because priority would be, of course, a kind of combination of risk and severity. It might be a high risk, but it's low severity. And so it might not be something that you want to give a high priority to. So you have low, medium, high priority and other types of priority settings and thresholds in there. And the idea is that we can also take all of that and have thresholds for this should automatically be assigned as a notable, or we know that based on the risk or based on the data that's involved, this jumps right over notable and immediately becomes a case for investigation, which gives you a little bit more insight into if there's something important that needs to be done. If I have my case log and I got all these cases in my system, those are higher priority than sometimes some of the notables. And so we can jump you right to the cases and have them automatically assigned to the best analyst. So the workspace kind of sets that threshold, but there can be another threshold kind of cascaded on top of that or superseded with importance. So you might have an entity, which again is that email address, that phone number column. If it can map back to an entity, then the rule system will pick up on the entity and go, oh, well, actually, because of this, now the severity or now the risk is going to be higher because the logic of the entity picks up. Or the rule itself, which is basically the search. And so this could apply to a more specific thing. It's not just that this email address is here, but this email address is inside this rule. So now the rule settings take effect. Or beyond the rule, this is sitting on a watch list somewhere. So I'm going to talk a little bit about watch lists towards the end, but we create a watch list of, let's say, bad actors, bad users in the system, users who've been banned from the system. So any activity by them would supersede the rule and go directly to a notable because we want to block that user immediately. And then finally, we still want to give analysts the power that they want, which is if you want to supersede all of that and say, no, I know what's best. I wrote the query that actually runs and returns a risk, a severity, a priority, or some sort of notable action. We'll use that instead. So you can always override the rule system manually per query. The nice thing, though, is that all of these systems, they hook into third-party data APIs. So you can actually hook into other systems that are already generating data for you, lookups and webhooks and other third-party systems. So that's kind of the technical stuff about SIEMplicity. Hopefully that didn't bore everybody, and I know it's a lot of information to take in, but it gives you kind of a sense of what it can do. The other important thing about SIEMplicity is not just that it's a technically, it's a good technical solution, but that it is actually a beautiful solution. It's something that's pretty to the eyes. It's something that you're spending long days looking at this. It'd be nice if it wasn't just black and white. It'd be nice if it wasn't just humdrum and boring. Also, if it wasn't just super cluttered with a bunch of widgets and buttons all over the place that you never use, but they're there. We want to simplify everything. And so if you want it to be really complex, great. You can use whatever solutions you want. If you want it to be really simple, you can also use our workflows. And we also think about that from a workflow perspective of what's intuitive. If you're first day on the job, how quickly can we get you from the first notable being assigned to you and working through the business process of investigation to coming up with a resolution on the other end? We want to make that workflow as seamless as possible. And we want to introduce things that maybe the software developers who are developing the solutions that you are using today haven't thought of, because maybe they're not using solutions that are more readily available in other spaces, other industries. So if you follow software development, there would be agile sort of programming style is involved. Well, there's Kanban boards and there's all kinds of different workflow solutions for that. When was the last time you saw any sort of SIEM or any sort of solution that had a task, anything more than just a task list? And you just kind of had, well, these were the most recent results and I can filter and search through them. I'm going to show you a demo of that because that's the given. We got to give you what you already have. But we want to plan to do so much more with that, including just simple things like, hey, this isn't important. Drag, drop, forget it. Like, let the system then analyze and figure out what to do with that information. Maybe that goes into a review system so that your manager can review that. Why did he discard this? Why is he dismissing so many? You can have additional rules kick in based on certain actions. And also, anything that you do within the system, we want to notify other systems about that. Because while we want to trust our analysts, there also has to be some supervision of what they're doing. So if you got somebody who's in the wire transfer division, and every time that they fraudulently make a wire transfer, they just kind of dismiss the notable about that, that's not exactly a good thing. So we want to solve those sort of problems, even if they don't exist readily. So kind of a big disclaimer, this is in early development. So there could be a lot of things that aren't visually perfect, and there's a lot of things that aren't technically perfect, but we're going to continually strive to make them better. So your insights and things are going to be invaluable to that effort. So we started with design, is actually what we did. We started with figuring out what we actually wanted the software to do. And so some of our early concept drawings included pictures similar to this of different ways of working throughout the application. And this is still pretty busy and it's still got a lot of information. It's a little blurry on the screen right now, but it has a focus on the main things of notables, cases, watch lists, and your settings. And so you're always reminded of, I'm here to deal with notables. I'm not here to deep dive into thousands of queries and write super complex stuff. I'm here to actually get jobs done that need to be done throughout my business. So if it is, my job is to close out wire transfer cases that are fraudulent. I need to investigate those, and I need to get the job done, and I should be reusing as many searches across cases as possible. I should be being given all the data, and the system should be kind of telling me the risk assessment so I can prioritize what I'm going to do next. So that's kind of an early design, but what's better than an early design is an early preview demo. So at this time I'm going to sit down here and run you through what SIEMplicity looks like. So the first thing is, let's make sure that Splunk is running. So I have a local installed, and it looks like it's already running. I have a locally installed Splunk instance. This is enterprise security instance of it. So it's just a matter of literally installing Splunk on your machine, and you can run everything locally. So for a testing perspective, if you guys were wanting to try this out, you don't have to run it against your actual systems. You can run it against a clone or a copy of it. It makes it really simple to get started. But it's a desktop here, and SIEMplicity is running right there as a desktop application.
The application, it requires Node.js, is that right?
It requires nothing, just install.
Requires nothing, okay.
Yeah. I can talk about the technicals behind the scenes. So what he's referring to is the fact that the application is actually developed in JavaScript using Electron. So if there's any software developers in here, they might know a little bit about that. But it's compiled down natively to native code, so it's actually executing pretty much at speeds of native applications. So an example of that might be if you're familiar with Facebook and Facebook's apps on the phones. Facebook's apps are written in React Native and compiled down natively. So, and similar concept, that's the same thing going on. So that's why we can build the solution in one code base and deploy it to anywhere. Splunk currently builds it in a combination of web technologies, but it's designed for the browser. And so wherever you have the browser, which means that they have to trace down all kinds of vendor browser problems. We don't have to do that. We just have to worry about the operating systems and the major ones. So again, Linux, Mac, Windows, all supported. So we get this launched, and that's what SIEMplicity looks like at first. Actually, when you first start it, if this was a fresh install, it would actually immediately take you to the setup server because it knows smart. It's pretty smart. It knows that you've never installed anything before, so we need to jump right into installing something. So usually an admin's going to do that. An admin's going to sit in here and he's going to get the workspaces set up. And so this is all seamlessly managed directly by SIEMplicity. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to set up a server. And I need to describe a connector. So I might have a search head for the First National Bank. I should slow down for a second here, sorry. And if there's like a specific question, stop me. I'm just on a rampage here, but I'm happy to answer any questions you might have. Just some things, again, I don't know what your level of experience or understanding of how Splunk works under the hood. You might use the web interface all the time. You might be a regular ninja at that, but you might not know some of the inner workings. There are, again, two types of connections for a connector. And a connector is just, I'm connecting to Splunk. So I'm connecting to my search head. There's two types of connections. There's the RESTful connection, or the API-driven connection, which we call the backend or the service host down here. And then there's the console connection. Interestingly enough, when you install Splunk out of the box, you have to actually enable SSL because it's not natively installed. So any sysadmins, they'd be familiar with this problem. So that's why these configuration settings are working like this out of the box. You would change this up with your IP address or your ports and your actual credentials. You'd always want to use SSL, things like that. But the console is the web interface. So I have Splunk running here. So I could just open this up in a browser. Pull up the, where's my, there we go. So nothing running on that, but if I run to 8000, I have Splunk running, and I was actually already logged in. Okay, so this is the screen that you're all familiar with. As you can see, there's nothing in here. I just got a completely fresh install. But if I were to go to the port 8089, I could actually access the RESTful API. Now that, interestingly enough, is only on SSL. So again, these sort of weird little settings, we've kind of taken all of that out of the picture for you. You should be running it all on SSL. This is something a server or one of the admins would set up, and then every user thereafter would have to actually set up the connector. But once connected, everything else from then on is all kind of automated. So I'm going to create a test connection here. And the system knows I need to have admin credentials, so I'm going to write in my admin credentials. Now we're signed in. So now I have access to create workspaces. And you say, what's workspace? It's a SIEMplicity app. So you might go into the actual site here and you might say, I want to find more apps and I want to go install Alert Manager. No need to do that. We can install it for you. So we come in and we say, I want to create a new workspace, or I want to select from one of the previously installed workspaces. So if you're looking to use SIEMplicity out of the gate, you say, well, I've already got all my apps installed. I've already got everything configured just the way I want it. I got all my searches in here. Make it simple for me. No problem. We do that. We can drop in any of the existing applications that you already have, and we upgrade those to be compatible with SIEMplicity. So we don't touch your data unless you tell us to, but we actually can run our data right alongside yours. And so in the same application workspace, we can have a SIEMplicity workspace. But we're going to go ahead and create a new one. And like I've been talking about, let's say that this is for the wire transfer division of First National Bank. If I can type right, there we go. I'm going to skip over the description. It's not necessary, but descriptions help you know why you actually created the workspace to begin with. And now I need marketplace credentials. So who was paying attention? What's the marketplace? Splunk-based, right. So again, if you're not using Splunk though, and this was a multi-vendor sort of install, you might be using something other than Splunk's marketplace. And so our marketplace might be an Amazon installation endpoint. It might be a custom SIEMplicity premium add-on that needs to be installed. But the idea is we need your marketplace credentials because we need to install some extra apps into your search head for you, or into the connection for you. So in this particular case, the only one right now that SIEMplicity needs is one of the well-known JSON tools so that we can deal with some JSON content in our actual searches. So that's what this is going to install for you. So I'm going to put in my credentials. I don't know what my passwords are, so copy this in. And one of the things is that I won't show the aspect of it, but let's say I put in the password wrong or something like that. It'll prompt me and tell me all those nice things. Again, nice things. It doesn't just use the system default, sort of alerts you in your face and you lose track of which alert goes with which window. It all keeps it nice and tight. And with that is specific application window interface. It stacks those modals on top of it. All these things that you really didn't pay that much attention to, but somebody had to take the time to actually design and think through and keep them consistent with the look and feel of the application. That's what we do. We make it simple for you. But one of the things is that if you did type in something wrong, it would let you know. Specifically with the marketplace, if you say, well, I don't want to install that, or let's say you already have the tools installed, it'll perform the tool upgrade for you. So that way you don't even have to bother with that. So if I were to go back, I would actually already have some of these things installed. It would just skip over those. If I come back in and I set up the connection again, it's just going to go right over top of it. So it's what's called independence. It does the same thing over and over again without changing the result. One of the other aspects though is you can skip over that marketplace functionality. So if it failed to install or something like that, the application will still run without some of these things, but it'll alert you, letting you know. So again, if there's anything that kind of goes off the rails from what SIEMplicity can do, it's going to put it back in the hands of the admin to self-correct. What we want you to do, though, is we want you to go up to this little help section, and we want you to report an issue, because we believe that issues should be reported timely and with lots of information. So because it's a desktop application, if you choose to, you can share with us the diagnostic information about the system so we know exactly what's going on, exactly where you went through the system, and where it failed. We can even actually share the screen, do screenshots of the system so we know exactly which screen you're on and what data was being presented to you, so there's less effort from you. You can just report an issue. Also, though, you can go and search for issues. And so if you want to go search an issue, and I think somebody else might have ran into the same problem, do us all a favor, don't report the same problem again and again. But hey, if you do have one that's new or different, report that issue and we get resolved. And then that becomes part of the frequently asked questions and the documentation for this system. Furthermore, though, let's say that you as a system administrator, you're configuring all this, and you have a team of documenters or caseworkers or managers who are very familiar with the workflow of your business and the intricate sort of ins and outs of how your business works. The whole idea is that you should have the documentation about the workspace, about the wire fraud division we're working in as an analyst, readily available. So you can actually write documentation and have it available within inside of the app. So if they ever get lost, they can go up to the search and they can ask SIEMplicity, how do I do this? And then SIEMplicity will respond back with your specific documentation on how to proceed forward with that particular case. So it dramatically improves the workflow and communication between teams. I'm just going to create an example rule here, but rules are, again, saved searches. That's the equivalent with inside of Splunk. We're going to create a saved search. SIEMplicity, you can actually create the searches directly with inside of SIEMplicity. A lot of the searches are going to exist elsewhere. They're already going to exist within your system. So you can just jump over there and you can just simply turn on which ones you want to listen to. And now those will be created as rules, and you can go back in and then configure those specific search rules. They're already running on a schedule. You can see that schedule is listed here directly from Splunk. We can also see the search fields. So again, if I had an entity already set up as an admin, I could actually know that this host or the source type, or if it was an IP address or something different, I could already have enrichers and validators going on in the system. So when notables do get triggered by this existing saved search, something your admins have already set up, your analysts have already set up, SIEMplicity can tap into that and use that. But for this demo, I'm going to go ahead and create a new rule. And I've got a little cheat sheet here. As Greg said, I am not I don't come from the world of InfoSec or anything like that. So I've been doing my best not to learn Splunk so I can stay as kind of empirical about it as possible and to have an outsider's perspective on how things are done. But this is a simple rule that even I can write, and it has an IP address and it spits out an email. So it's really straightforward, but I'm going to run it on a 1-minute schedule. And so that's going to happen every minute. And you say, well, that's not flexible enough. I need all the fancy tools of Splunk at my disposal. No problem. Again, we just open up the console and you can go find that particular search. Oh, wait, there's the actual app already there inside of Splunk. I can come in here, I can type in my search, I can save my search, I can go back to SIEMplicity, and I can do it. I can enable that rule. I can then customize the additional method fields that are available only with inside of SIEMplicity. You can also then, at a later point, we don't have it for this demo today, but we do have plans to make it far more capable within the search capabilities of SIEMplicity. So just about anything you can create as a search with inside of Splunk or any sort of back-end solution, you can also do with inside of SIEMplicity. So there's obviously differences between Splunk's SPL and maybe say a MySQL data connector. They're both SQL-like sort of expressions and whatnot, but they're completely different. So the interfaces will be subtly different, but the idea is that you're, as an analyst, writing searches for your specific data backend, but it's all being aggregated together as this common rule set, which is really powerful. So I'm going to run this one on a 1-minute schedule, and the time to live there is just for the artifacts. They create those search jobs in the background, and they expire at a certain point. Splunk comes along and reads them, and garbage collects. Well, we need to collect those before they go away. So 60 minutes would be configured if you had analysts, basically 24/7. Gives SIEMplicity about 60 minutes to go ahead and grab at that artifact. If you set it down something lower, you might run into a case where an analyst didn't have their SIEMplicity app running, and so it didn't catch that notable, and then the job expired. And that happens inside of Splunk today. Even inside of the alert managers and things like that, they can have their time to live configuration rules incorrect. So you want to always pay attention to this, and that's why some of these things are better suited for an admin or somebody who's very familiar with Splunk. And then as an analyst, you're more focused on what does this mean? So once I got the data, what does it mean for my business? I'm going to set this for 60 minutes. It's more than enough for us because we're running it on a minute schedule. I actually already have some other analysts in here. I got Greg Woodcock in here, and I got John Doe in here. And so I can go ahead and enable these workspaces for them. And SIEMplicity would go ahead and invite that analyst to join SIEMplicity and install the app. So the system can actually send out an email to them. They can do one of those, if you've ever used Slack, they have the magic URL and it quickly installs on your desktop or your phone, and so you don't have to put in all your credentials. Similar to that, we can send out a unique URL to you and it'll install and it'll automatically have all the configuration settings. You say, as an admin, rolling this out to my team of 100 people is going to be a nightmare. It's going to take all day. Probably the longest amount of time is actually just configuring SIEMplicity as an admin. I'm taking an incredibly long time to do this because I'm explaining everything. There's only 5 steps to the whole thing to get up and running as having SIEMplicity installed. From then on, it's just what do the analysts want to do and configure. But the idea is that you can send out this email to everybody. Immediately, everybody can get involved. Some of the other things that are built into SIEMplicity are drag and drop for like importing and exporting of configuration files. So if you have a configuration and you want to share that with other users, you can simply export it and then they can drag and drop it on SIEMplicity. It's smart enough to figure out what you're trying to do, and it'll go ahead and install that and configure it, and you're right up and running. Again, that magic URL though, if I were to enable this for Greg and for John Doe, then both of these would get an analyst role. And as an analyst, they're restricted to certain capabilities. They might be able to go into Splunk and do certain things, but within inside of SIEMplicity, they are locked into that specific workspace and that specific role that they have. So as an admin, you can control that, and you can invite and add more analysts later. You can also create a new user. So I could just as easily create a new user. That user is now inside of Splunk. They're assigned the analyst role, and they can access whatever I assign them through SIEMplicity. So again, trying to take the cognitive load off of actually, do I have to be inside of SIEMplicity? Do I have to be inside of Splunk? Either one, it works just fine. We wanted to make it as simple as possible. So I'm going to go ahead and grant access, and now we're set up. And this is a placeholder video, but we're going to have plenty of documentation and screen casts of all the workflow. So if you are trying to learn SIEMplicity, you don't have to read a book, you can watch a video. You can learn how this thing works. And if there's at some point, any time that you want to have, I don't know how this works, and we don't have a video for it, you again, submit that report issue. We need a video about this. How does this work? And somebody can explain it to you. So with that said, we can then go set up another server. So let's say I have another connection, because this is all about being multi-tenant here. So if I had another connection, I would come in here and I could either reuse the one I already had, and I could set up another workspace on the same search head, or I could create another workspace or another search head altogether, or another connector. So I might have First National Bank, but First National Bank just acquired, Second National Bank. And so now I've got 2 different solutions at play. And this is where SIEMplicity comes in a way that right now, Splunk isn't able to service, because Second National Bank doesn't use Splunk. I don't know why they're not, but they're not. So how do we actually get them involved? We don't want our analysts being broken up into 2 separate sort of workflows. We want them all using the same application, following the same workflows, because the whole point is we acquired Second National Bank. They're now part of First National Bank, but there's that technical gap where they're transitioning all the people over, they're transitioning all the data over, they're eventually setting up Splunk and everything. But in the meantime, they're using something completely different. Maybe they're not even using anything fancy. They're just having syslogs, and that's it. And they got analysts on terminals banging away trying to find data in syslogs. That's fine. SIEMplicity can go and read that as a connector. And so you can set up a connector. Right now, we're officially only supporting Splunk. We have plans to expand. So that's just why I'm not going to go through that demo. But that's the idea behind SIEMplicity, is you should be able to truly go across multiple vendors, across multiple search heads, either Splunk or anything else, and it all still works the same and all within the same application.
Your multi-tenancy is everything. I'm multi-vendor. I can aggregate multiple search heads together, but even within a search head, I can have multiple groups. But even within multiple groups, I can share the same alert fire.
Correct.
Right? I can say this same thing, this group cares about it for one reason, this other group cares about it for a different reason. So one alert fire can actually go into 2 different workspaces.
So what that would be the equivalent of, I wrote a save search inside of Splunk, and I've created 2 workspaces, workspace A and workspace B. And I've got this search, and it fires alerts. Normally, with inside of Splunk, and even with inside of add-ons to Splunk, that means whatever the workspace or the app that owns that saved search is going to fire the alert, but it's going to stay within inside of that unless I pipe it somewhere else. And if I do pipe it somewhere else, I'd have to create multiple actions and then configure all of that to do it. With inside of SIEMplicity, it's really simple. You just create the saved search, and then you create 2 rules, one rule with inside this workspace, one rule inside this workspace, pointing to the same saved search. So every time that saved search is fired, it's going to copy the notables to both of them. So both divisions now have a copy of this. So, somebody who's actively doing a physical pen test in order to get, digital access to, access to your servers in a physical space, right? They're breaking into your facility and you got events firing off for the alarm systems and everything else going on. And then somebody breaches the actual server room, and now it's escalated to, an actual digital sort of attack. At that point, you have 2 different divisions probably involved. You don't just have your security team involved, physical security team. You also have your digital security team, and both teams now have to be informed about this. So wouldn't it be really great if you could cross-copy notables from one workspace to another workspace and coordinate all that? Again, that's where SIEMplicity comes in to do that.
You could actually have, split your security team apart, give them their own workspaces.
Yeah.
They could do, a competition.
You can do red, blue, and you can do all kinds of A/B testing, or you can also have competitions like you're saying, but you can split even a division up into 2 different workspaces because of the types of notables, and maybe just want to provide focus, because that's another aspect of SIEMplicity, is providing the developer with, or the analyst with focus involved. So I'm going to create another workspace, but on the same connector. Another little note is you'll notice it asks me for my credentials again, because again, SIEMplicity takes security seriously, so we're not going to save your credentials unless you want us to. So we can save the credentials, and some people need that, want that, so they don't have to be constantly prompted for it, but by default, it's only available in the application as long as the application needs it, and we get rid of it. Marketplace credentials, we as SIEMplicity have no need for those other than the one time we need to access your marketplace account. So because it's not a first priority or a first party client, we never save those credentials. But the credentials for the actual search head, we can save those as the analyst on that computer. You can easily wipe those out. You can sign out of your account at any time. And again, you can also keep them only in memory. So if you close the application or even just the window, it's gone. So we sign in, and you can see here I got the wire transfer division. I might have the credit card fraud division, which is a different workspace. Again, this time I'm going to go ahead and put in some bogus stuff, and you'll see it comes back and tells me, oh, that doesn't look like it's right, but I'm going to continue anyway. I already know that I've installed the applications as an admin, so I can just skip over that. It didn't warn me about that, telling me, hey, did you, sure you installed all these things? I'm going to continue anyway. So this time I'm going to have a different rule. Go ahead, grab that little piece of information, and for those who are paying attention, you'll see that this is not a valid IP address for remote access, and this is not a valid IP address for remote access, and it's not a valid email address, period. So this should fail validation rules. And the whole point is that you might actually perform a search that would generate some sort of data that looks like this. One of the results in there might actually have some data that's incorrect. You were scraping Craigslist for some reason, and you had a bunch of Craigslist email addresses. They would look something like this because Craigslist doesn't allow you to show the @ symbol. Well, this isn't a valid email address still. So if you're trying to do, your business solution is scraping information off the web and then trying to somehow clean that up, and you're firing events to know, hey, do I need to actually process this, and kick this out to a team to manually process? It's not always information security that's actually involved. It could just be a matter of this is business automation, and we're dealing with big data. So this is an example, though, where John Doe should fail validation, and it might even appear on a bad actor list. So knowing some of this might increase the actual risk of might increase the risk for this particular event. Now, previously the other workspace was called example rule. Here I can call it example rule as well because they are 2 separate workspaces. So again, just like in SIEMplicity or in Splunk, you have saved searches. As long as they're under a different workspace, they can have the same name. We take care of that as well. And live demo, and we got a bug. So something's not running. I am in developer mode, so give me 1 second to see what the log is. Maybe it's something I can quickly fix. I'm getting a forbidden. Have to look into that later. Let's see if it actually created over here in SIEMplicity or Splunk. just as for those who are curious, we'll zoom in a little bit so you can see better. The SIEMplicity add-on app was installed on the first time we created a connector, and that's the actual app that runs. It's hidden, so people aren't just monkeying around with it. That shouldn't be, but it's, the SIEMplicity add-on app is what actually runs and reaps all the information. It installed the JSON Tools app, which is a third-party app to help, and it did look like it created the credit card fraud division, but for some reason it's just not picking up on it right now. Skip over that. And then let's go back to set up Windows Server. Let's go back to startup. Okay, so something didn't quite work here. I could delete it and start again. Maybe it'd work better that second time around. It is here. I'm going to look at the actual objects though. I just want to show you kind of what SIEMplicity creates. So SIEMplicity creates a bunch of different things within inside the workspace, but mainly it creates those collections or KV stores. And if you've heard anything about the KV stores, they sometimes don't always work. That's another reason why we want to give you choices. So if you're not comfortable putting it into the KV store for whatever reason, no problem. We can put it out into a MySQL database or some third-party API and call it there. So where you want your data in the end, as far as the notables and cases, it's where you want it. By default, we throw it into a KV store. KV stores are not quite as accessible to some regard as other parts of Splunk, so that's kind of where we did it. It's a little bit hidden. But you can actually get in here and you can see that we have cases, we have entities, notables, a queue for processing all the background jobs, our rules and things are set up in here. So one of the things I want to do is I just want to see the rules and double check that we actually have rules in there. Give me 1 second to do that. So if I come in here and I say I want to go to, what was this app called? Credit Card Fraud Division. And I'm going to go into the rules collection. I don't have any rules, so whatever failed earlier, it didn't actually create rules. If I did have rules, it would look something like this. So a rule is pretty simple, and they get more complicated as the application you continue to configure and add more and more settings. It gets more and more complicated, but the idea is that it's just pointing to a specific rule. So the example rule is what it's pointing to and it's running. So in the background here, it's running that rule. Let's go over to SIEMplicity though, and let's actually launch or open the workspace. So up to this point, we've been doing some configuration essentially. Let's actually open one of these workspaces and see what it looks like. And there we go. Now you'll notice that the number is churning. That's because the background worker has been picking up on the fact that the cron job is running on a minute-by-minute schedule. And so there's been a bunch of things that have been queued up in that queue, and they're now being processed. So the agent just opened it, and so now they're being processed. If I was to close it, it would stop the agent. And if there's no other connected agents, then they stay in the queue waiting to be further processed. But again, if I open it back up, it picks up right where it left off, and it continues processing. So that's really handy. Now the UI and design of this is still obviously very much incomplete. We plan on having lots of pretty dashboard configurations here so you can make visuals and get a quick glance at what's going on within this workspace. So again, this workspace is the wire transfer division on the connector for the First National Bank. So if you have a bunch of them, you might throw them up into multiple windows, have them full screen, swipe between the screens so you can just be very focused on what you're trying to accomplish at any given time. With the Notables tab though, we can come in here and we can see live data being updated. It's sorted by default by the last created time or last processed time. So you can kind of scroll back in time and see what's happening. But if you think about the searches that we ran, I ran a search that provided 2 sets of data in it, right? Or 3. It provided time because Splunk automatically adds a hidden time field. So we see that time field here. We see the email address because that's what I specified. It's a valid email address. So that's why I see this little checkbox over here, because SIEMplicity actually ran validation logic on top of the notable. When the notable fired, it figured out, okay, well, that's an email address entity. And because that's an email address entity, let's validate that. Let's check against a regex expression. So you could write your own regex expressions for just about anything. So I want to know that it's a Visa credit card. So it's got to start with a 4 in the front. That's a very simple one. Or if I want to know it's a MasterCard, and you have another one. You can have all these different types of things. But furthermore, like the IP address, that one I used to look up. So I actually went out to a third-party API, a publicly available third-party API, and I pinged that IP address. If anybody knows that IP address, you'd know that that's the Splunk servers for Splunk.com. So it's pointing back to an Akamai server up in Chicago. And so I get the America of Chicago, I get the country. For whatever reason, it didn't bring in the city with the information, but I get the latitude and longitude coordinates of where that IP address resolves to. So if I was trying to do some sort of mapping of this information, I could have a visual representation of all this information on a map. So some of these things, again, they're planned, they're on the roadmap, they're just not built in yet. But these are the types of things that we're going to be capable of doing with inside of SIEMplicity, and all following the business rules for that workspace. So every workspace, every division can have its own sort of focused effort of how we process notables, how we process cases within here, or what we call a phone number means something different than what they call a phone number. Because sometimes it does. If it's an inbound receiver or an outbound phone call, we might change the dynamics of what that means. Or an email address might not just mean an email address. It might also mean a user's identity for login. So we want to know if that's on a system. Right now, the system is just generating random risk for demonstration purposes, but the risk analysis system kicks in and would actually process and figure out, okay, this is the information that's in here, and based on a watch list, this IP address is a known bad actor, and so we're going to go ahead and increase the risk score for that particular attribute. But then we also did the enhancements, and we found out that there was a mismatch for the IP address and something else. Maybe the IP address came back to a city, and that doesn't match the shipping address or the billing address. So we know that the person's ordering from someplace that they're not supposed to be, or that the distance between the two, and we could have calculations for distance between the two locations. And that distance is too far, it's beyond our business rules, it's beyond 500 miles, and so we don't think that that's a legitimate thing, except around Christmas time, in which case Amazon, has to ship out all these boxes to loved ones everywhere. And so for that purposes, maybe we relax the rules. So again, this is where everything comes back to, as analysts, you're still in charge. You're still the ones driving the actual rule system, but it's the rules of your business, not just satisfying some sort of search query or just trying to get all the data in one big search. Make lots of small searches. Let them generate all these notables, and then let SIEMplicity take care of merging notables, deduping duplicate ones, because it's inevitable at some point you're going to write duplicate queries and you're going to generate duplicate notables. Not a problem. We can figure out, oh, these things are the exact same, let's just go ahead and dedupe. Or these are very similar or related, and therefore they should be grouped together and be merged into the same case. And so you can then begin working on cases. And let's say two analysts accidentally worked on similar things and they started two different cases. No problem, we can merge the cases together. So some of these power tools that are available outside of Splunk, we're bringing to capabilities within Splunk. So it's a real add-on to what Splunk's capable of doing. A couple other little notes. Coming back to these other screens. Just to demonstrate a little bit some of the care we think about for the design aspects. Of course, there's licensing agreements and everything involved with this application. Some example windows. So we've been looking at all these designs, and this is what we'd really call the default mode. Right now within the demo, it's actually called dark mode. It's actually using my system preferences. So another benefit of working with a operating system is I can tie into the actual operating system preferences. So if I come into general and I change it from dark mode to light mode, you'll see all the screens immediately change. And so if you prefer to work at night or in a darker room and you want it to go back to dark mode, no problem. You just go back into dark mode. We have, like I said, this is kind of the default mode because it's a little split between light and dark. It's not a true dark mode. So we're going to be adding additional themes. And let's say you want to trick out your actual design. We can provide customizations there so you can fine tune it to fit in with your designs. Another aspect is that we can project these. And so different views, for example, we're looking at notables right now. And if this notable here, for example, I didn't want to look at the task view, but I wanted to look at that Kanban board. So right now we don't have the designs put together for the actual demo here, but I can Kanban board. So maybe I want a Kanban based on risk. And so I have groupings of risk category or severity or based on priority or assigned agent. So I can look at everything that's just for me versus looking at things for everybody else. So who here actually has a team that has like an analyst manager and then analysts underneath that, so that manager is actually the person who kind of assigns cases or peer reviews, okay? So SIEMplicity would make that a dream because your manager could sit in here watching the notables come in and go, that would be best for this person, that person, that person, that person, that person. And then as the analyst, you come in, you just see the ones that are assigned to you, and you have total focus.
Old drag and drop.
Yeah.
From a manager.
Yeah, with drag and drop or just simple touch and hit. But better than that, as the manager, the system starts learning what you're doing. So it starts analyzing that type of notable usually gets assigned to Joe, this type of notable usually gets assigned to Susie. So I'm going to start assigning, automatically suggesting Susie for this and John for that. And so we slowly get a sort of organically learning machine that knows your specific preferences versus just arbitrarily throwing all this data at you and having to figure it out each time. So the idea is we're trying to take away from you having to make the same decision over and over and over again. We'd rather you start with new decisions that have never been thought of before, new details that you would like to see. And again, for that, we want you to constantly be pushing information to us and telling us what you're looking for. So, again, we could have that, or we could have priorities. So we can actually do kind of like Google does with its inbox, if you've used that, smart priority views and whatnot. We can do the same sort of thing. We can help you prioritize. This is something that this is urgent, it's time sensitive. You need to deal with this now versus you can deal with this later. Some other preferences could be for smart grouping. Like I said, the cases are relatable. So maybe you completed one notable and that resulted in a case. Maybe we identify other cases that would likely have the same predictive outcome. So for example, after 100 cases have been processed, we have enough data to kind of get a sense that these types of phone numbers, these types of locations, they're higher risk for, let's say, shipping fraud happening in Tennessee around an urban center that has a known meth outbreak. Maybe they're shipping a whole bunch of drugs or something, and that's actually a locality-based thing. SIEMplicity could actually pick up on that sort of location-based awareness and start going, hey, I predict that an order placed in this same sort of town is going to result in a case of fraud. So I'm just going to go ahead and predict that it's going to be fraud and suggest that you go ahead and mark it as such. Now, again, it's up to the analyst to do it. It's up to the analyst to take that final decision, but you have that choice and you have that information. Or another example of that is where risk is automatically reassessed. So if at any time, let's say John Doe signed up for a new online store and he's about to place an order, and so he signs up his account, and John Doe's a good guy at that point because we have no data on him. We maybe looked him up on a bad actor list and we didn't find him. We looked him up on a spam list, we didn't find him. It looks like a legitimate email, so everything looks good. And then he places an order, and then he places another order, and he places another order, and each time he's placing an order, he's placing it with a different credit card. So each time he's doing that, maybe at some point the system picks up, because you have a saved search running, that finds repeated orders within a certain period of time. So all we need is the email address, the order number, maybe the credit card number, the total, something like that. Some very basic pieces of information, but we can then hit your third-party systems to aggregate and pull that other information, like the complete order details. And we start noticing that actually John Doe is not a good guy. He keeps using the same credit cards over and over again. Or we keep pinging the fact that his credit cards keep failing, and so those fired other events. Now all these events are coming together, and we're pushing them all into a case. Now we mark the fact that he's a bad actor, and we add him to the bad actor list. SIEMplicity is smart enough to go back through and reassess all the other notables to determine the risk factor for all of those as well. So just because it was safe at one point doesn't mean that that same value is safe later. Or again, vice versa, misidentification. And something got misidentified as being a bad actor, and it actually is a good one. Maybe this happens to many people when they're traveling and their credit card gets marked as fraudulent orders, and you have to call your bank and deal with that because you didn't put in the travel notice. Not a problem. With a system like this, you can actually schedule a travel notice and put them on a watch list to prevent them from actually triggering those notables or reducing the risk of those notables. I'm traveling to Turkey between these two dates, so if I have a notable that fires from Turkey within these two dates, well, clearly I'm in Turkey, and that's what I told you, so the bank should be smart enough not to shut down my credit card when I'm on other side of the world. Those are the types of things that SIEMplicity should help your business do, because that's the whole point of your business, is to help keep good actors doing good things and bad actors from doing bad things. I think that's pretty much it of the live demo. Let's get back to what happened to our slide deck? I think I left our slide deck. Give me 1 second. Get back there.
Don't forget, there's plenty of food for seconds, I'm sure. You guys are still hungry.
Okay, so let's jump to where we left off. So we had the demo. Let's talk a little bit about watch lists for a second, because this is a special feature that, while it doesn't exist from a demonstratable purpose right now, we have some other software we're working on that we haven't prepared even for a demo, but this is a big key feature of it. The beauty of simplicity is that you have rules, safe searches, they have a defined schema, and then that schema kind of defines all the different entities of your business. So you define things like home address, because that's what I care about as a business. I care about people's home addresses. I care about people's, we had somebody from Experience, so I care about people's credit score profiles and such like. I care about credit cards, I care about phone numbers and email addresses, all these different well-defined entities. And I define rules and risks and thresholds for all of these as a workspace level or as a connection level even. And then as rules start being created, I just start returning different things, like I return an email address or again a credit card or some person's name or something. And they show up on a watch list because I'm also curating alongside all these entities, I'm curating watch lists. Good actors, bad actors. Watch lists are defined or scored based on a whitelist, which usually is for suppressing things. Like again, I'm traveling abroad and so I don't want my card being shut off because it's a new location. So it's going to suppress notables about that because those are known to be okay. Watch lists have expiration dates. So you can set for a particular watch list item, you can say this item's being on the watch list, but it's only being watched for the next 15 days. So again, if you've ever had to call in your bank and tell them that you're traveling abroad, that's one of the questions they ask is what's the time frame in which you're doing it? They're using systems like this to do that. So they put it on a whitelist to say it's okay. Or maybe it's not a full suppression. Maybe it's just a dramatic reduction. We weight it instead of 100 points, it's going to be reduced to 25% of that, so it's going to be 25 points. Or we're going to reduce it by 25 points, so instead of 100, it's now going to be 75. And so your systems might automatically do things differently based on the fact that it's not 100, but 75. Maybe it just generates a notice instead of generating a full-on alert. Blacklists are usually used to escalate issues. So they're a known bad actor. This is a stolen credit card. So if I get any charges that are resulting in this, I know exactly what to do with it. I know to immediately create a notable, or better yet, skip the notable phase altogether and jump right to a case. Maybe even predictively analyze the fact that it should be automatically marked as fraud. And then when it is marked as fraud, that case is closed. We have action hooks that can ping into third parties. So what would be better is not just to mark it as fraud and have your system automatically mark it as fraud, but actually have the system then ping your actual e-commerce site in real time to tell it to shut it off and to terminate that order immediately, to stop shipping and processing of the order because we know it's wrong. So these are the things that SIEMplicity can do that are sometimes a little more difficult to do in other data backends because they're associated mostly with the data. We're associated mostly with your business workflow. Watch list items, and this is a distinction between kind of watch lists if you are familiar with ES and how its watch list works. From what I understand, again, I'm not a Splunk expert or even a SIEM expert, but our watch lists are a little different. We have values, multi-values, and lookups. A value, plain and simple, it's a case-insensitive string. Many of you probably have to go and change that constantly to case sensitive or case insensitive. We go with case insensitive because we're trying to find the most amount of alerts. So we don't want to make it to where a simple typo winds up not generating a notable. We want it to be case insensitive by default, but you can always configure that. The multi-values, so let's say you have not just John Doe, but Jane Doe as well. They're both email addresses that are known bad actors. Both of those email addresses are on the blacklist, and so again, you can have multiple values and you can just write them directly in there. So inside of SIEMplicity, an analyst can come in and say, this is a bad credit card, this is a fraudulent credit card, I'm going to add them directly myself to the blacklist. They don't have to go and put it in some third-party, file. They don't have to put it inside of a lookup. They don't have to write more queries to inject it where it's supposed to be so that it can then be queried by another big complex one. It's very, very simple. Just write it right there in, and then every time any one of the rules hits that watch list item, it'll automatically be flagged. The action will automatically happen. And again, to Greg's point, if it's involved in multiple workspaces, multiple notables can be created within multiple workspaces according to different watch lists within each workspace. So really powerful. The other type is lookup. So when you actually need the full power of Splunk or you need the full power of SIEMplicity to go and do lookups, you can use, of course, the file lookups that are available within inside of Splunk. Of course, that requires that you have to upload a file and do a bunch of different things. So we make it even simpler. We say just put in a URL to a website that is accessible by the same system. We'll make an authenticated call to it, and you can go and fetch that data down. I'll show you an example of that in a second. So you could actually have an entire email address of spammers or a do not call list of phone numbers that you're not supposed to call. And so if you get an inbound or outbound call that's getting registered, you can immediately shut off the system because it's known to be bad, and so that event triggered immediate action and follow through. So that includes premium and third-party webhooks. So if you remember from the beginning, I talked about Splunk-based as a marketplace. SIEMplicity also has a marketplace for premium add-ons for those webhooks. So we'll get into the monetization scheme later. But the idea is that if you had some sort of validator or some sort of webhook, you can write your own, or you can pay to have access to premium ones, which are officially supported by SIEMplicity. So that can also mean that the risk assessment can be outsourced to third parties. So if you have a bad actor list of do not calls, you might have this particular phone number has a lower risk, or this particular email address has a higher risk. So different values aren't all arbitrarily the same, but you can actually have a third party figuring out what the risk is, and then SIEMplicity will just take that risk and start from there, adding to that risk more information. So again, if you need even more power, then you can always just go and create one of these custom lookups for case sensitive, but all of ours are case insensitive, and they support wildcard, multiple wildcards. So you can write something like johnstar at gmail.com, and it'll find anything that's John, starting with John. I don't know why you'd want to do that. No offense to John here, but you can do that. It's really straightforward. You can also put multiples. You can have starting and ending. So anything that's kind of this pattern matching. We're trying to make it simple for you to basically write more powerful features faster, so you can get more information available about a particular case. A watch list definition, just from a technical perspective, is a file, a field, and a format. A format is by default, which is case sensitive. There's insensitive, CIDR, and wildcard. Ours are always case insensitive wildcards by the default format. But scoring values, as I mentioned, it's really simple syntax. So as far as like, how do I integrate this with third-party developers? You might host a do not call list or some sort of email ban list or something like that is part of a lookup. All you need is basically two columns. You need the value, which can be titled anything in the column list that you want, and you need the risk, which again can be called anything you want based on the way definitions work. But that risk score, it can just simply be an integer, in which case we use incrementing. So if it's an integer like plus 50 or minus 50, we're just going to add that. So if the risk was 50 and we added 50, the risk is now 100. If the risk was 50 and we subtracted 50, the risk is now 0. So it's a simple way to increment or set the risk using third-party data. But also, if you set it to a floating number, like a 0.25, some sort of fractional like that, then it's going to use a weighting system. So if it was 50, and we say the weight is going to be 0.25, then that's a bad example. Let's go with 100. 100, yeah, 12.5, there we go. It weighted. And earlier we were talking about this, and he said, well, what if I just want to completely wipe out the risk? Then use 0.0, and it'll completely wipe out the risk, and so now you just reset it. But better than that is watch lists have actions. And so actions, and this screen will help identify 3 types of watch lists, and specifically items on different watch lists, is we've got for example, the first, I guess technically the second column, but the first watch list is travel notice. So cardholder reported they were traveling. Don't you love it when systems don't provide you ways to comment on the actual reason you created this thing to begin with? And so you got to have like embedded comments inside your queries and all kinds of other things like that to figure out what was I even trying to do, because I don't know if it's ever happened to you, but I've slept since then, so I've already forgotten what I was doing yesterday. Having reasons, our actual system allows you to provide a comment and a reason for everything. So this is a whitelist item for a credit card entity. The type is a value, so it's a single value, and the value is a credit card number right there. And then I have an effective date. So from 2019, 08, 13, so from today plus 30 days till it expires, this watch list item is in effect. Also, from within inside of SIEMplicity, it's really simple to find the ones that are expired, find the ones that are effective, find the ones that are permanently effective and always effective kind of thing, or those that are about to expire in case they need to be extended a little bit longer. It's terrible when somebody penetrates your system all because something expired and you just didn't know that it expired until the one day, and they happen to penetrate right during that one day. So again, the scoring system, as is kind of shown there, is I think I have a nice little. Hold on a second. Pointer, there we go. So right here, we have this weighting system. So I'm using the scoring type of a weight, and I'm doing -0.5. So since this is a whitelist, what it's trying to do, therefore, is it's trying to reduce it by 50%. So whatever the risk would have been, I'm going to reduce it by 50%. And so that's again where watch lists kind of supersede all the other rules. They're like the last in the chain, with the exception of the actual result. If you include a special field in the result, it will supersede all of that even. So action is suppress, which means that it's going to create a notable, but it's immediately going to suppress that notable right after. And you say, why would we do that? Well, don't you want to write queries that work, and then if they don't work, you still generated the notables, so you can find out like what happened and why maybe it didn't work or why it didn't hit the particular triggered amount, versus writing a query and then it just being lost to ether because you didn't properly save it. This happens all the time, and so it's really nice to be able to still fire the notable, but suppress all the further processing of it. And so it basically keeps it there for an audit trail, and then that way, if somebody is generating a bunch of suppressions, we can identify maybe we don't need to be generating all these suppressions, maybe that is actually important data and we didn't lose it to begin with. So you can always go back to your notables and you can always find them and then reopen those as brand new notables. The option for fake emails is another example of a blacklist using multi-value. And so you see there I have John Doe and Jane Doe, and it's kind of a multi-value JSON string there. So that's kind of the same thing, except it's a lot simpler with inside of SIEMplicity's UI. You just type in new values and it just keeps figuring it out. No comma separating, no having to double quote, no having to new line stuff. You just type in the values, it'll figure it out for you. The effective date with no expiration, so it's just in perpetuity, it's just from this date, it's forward, it's going to be in effect. Scoring is increment type, value 50, so every time that this value occurs, your automatic risk on that notable is going to increase by 50 points. And the system is going to keep track of what fields it evaluated the risk for, so that the total risk that's coming up, maybe we get a risk of 1,000, there's a breakdown of where that 1,000 came from. So you're not just looking at it going, oh, well, this particular notable is 1,000, so it's obviously worse than the one that's 500, but rather you're able to see, well, the biggest factor here was the fact that there's a missing shipping and billing address, or that there was a mismatch on that. So it's not that fact that the email address was a slight, invalid, or that the phone number was a known do not call list or something. Those might be much less severe compared to, the fact that the shipping addresses don't match. The last list shows a spam caller list. It's again a blacklist. It's using a lookup type, and it's pointing to a do not call CSV file hosted at a website. I used HTTP there. I should have used HTTPS in my demo notes. You should always use secure communication, which is another thing that if you want to talk with something insecurely, SIEMplicity really makes it difficult for you to do that. So from that perspective, only a system admin would have to be able to configure those sort of things. So again, we're all in system security, so we should all know what we're doing, but sometimes the vendor says, I only host it in HTTP, and it's insecure. Well, now you're making calls across the wire that are insecure and can be eavesdropped on. So we shouldn't be doing that just because the vendor won't support it. There's workarounds, and that's again where some of the premium stuff comes in, is we actually can host wrappers to make a secure call, so we're making the insecure call so you can make the secure one. The effective date again there, but then you'll notice that the scoring is also lookup type. So in this particular case, it's also hitting the exact same CSV file, but it's just looking at a different field. So instead of the risk field, or instead of the telephone field, it's hitting the risk field. And so now I can correlate that if it's on the list, and here's the risk that's associated with it. So every phone number or every email address or whatever has a different risk assignment. And that makes it really simple to figure out some things. Also, what's interesting is if the admin wants to enable sort of analytics and tracking, we can actually pull in that DNC file in whole, and we can run linear regression and other types of machine learning algorithms to figure out what is the most likely candidate for like the average and the sum of all the risk within that file. So we can also be reporting some of that information to you. Sometimes people like to track those as key performance indicators of a system. They want that on a big dashboard. Speaking of dashboards, plan to support big screen displays, so you can publish this out, so you can have your, show that on a big screen in your offices or in your bullpen or whatever, so you have all the vital stats all available to anybody walking in the room at any given time. They can be watching their KPIs across the screen. This would be able to plug directly into that. You'll notice that for the fake emails and the spam callers, we have two different types of actions. We have a case action and a notable. A notable action means no matter what the risk was, it might have not met our thresholds to actually create notables, but we're going to create a notable anyway. So it creates a notable. Case not only creates the notable, but also starts a case, an investigation, so you can immediately begin investigating. And so that may give you a higher priority. It can also then identify that this case matches another case, and it can merge those cases for you, so that way you're knowing this case or this notable belongs in that case already. So it'll try and find a case that's already open that this would naturally fall into. Maybe it's the same actors and same basic, the notables match up perfectly. So we're going to go ahead and throw those into that same case. And then if the analyst says, no, that notable doesn't belong there, he can easily move it and drag and drop it to another one. Simple. So SIEMplicity features roadmap. This is where, I've talked about a lot of the features that are on this list. I don't know if this is where Greg wants to jump in as well. This is more the brainstorming side, so we could go with questions. We have a huge features list, 3 pages long here, of features that we are working on. You've seen about 10% of them, and we're going to be just continually throwing out new stuff as often as we can roll it out. One of the benefits of the software is that because it's desktop software, it will automatically upgrade if you'd like it to. Again, admins can always turn that off if they don't want that sort of behavior. But one of the things we focus on is what we call seriously SIEMver. As software developers, we know the importance of stability with our software and our dependency chain. And while we're depending on different back-end solutions, which sometimes don't have the same levels of SIEMver control, which is basically major, minor, and patch versions, and where nothing breaks in between minor versions and patch versions for sure. We allow you to kind of, using SIEMplicity, can normalize some of those behaviors. So if you're worried about doing an upgrade, ideally if you're using SIEMplicity, our solution might not work for the actual searches because those are still running on Splunk, and there might be something that's breaking there, but our application can still cross over. So even if you're going from a particular version, like for us, it was a late version of 7.2, broke in like 7.2.6, and then it was fixed in 7.3, but then it was broke in 7.3.1, but then it was like fixed in 7.3.2. We normalize that, so no matter which version you're on, at least SIEMplicity still works with those. So we can kind of fix some of those issues. Same thing with version control of the actual software. We can roll out those updates immediately to you. And so you're able to gain some of those new benefits immediately. Anything here that, like, as you're seeing the screen, you want me to talk about, I can. I don't want to take too much time if there's questions and whatnot. See if I haven't covered anything. Data spaces, virtual workspaces. So let's say you have 2 workspaces, because that's kind of the whole point of SIEMplicity. You're going to have multiple divisions. You're going to have multiple divisions or workspaces directly within inside your SIEMplicity app. You might have 4 or 5 that you're working in. Again, instead of the 100 that are over in Splunk, you're only seeing the 4 or 5 that matter to you. So you're never being distracted by stuff that you don't need to know about. So you see these 4 workspaces, you have them open on your screen. Maybe you got one of those big monitors and you got all 4 workspaces open. You got the dashboard here, the notables here, the cases here. You got it all open, you got it all displayed. What if, though, you wanted to see all of that information together, kind of aggregated together into one? Well, that's where virtual workspaces come in. So it's not an actual app in the back end. It's a virtual app. It only exists on your client. And so it's not even customized to the point that it shares with other agents. Each agent can actually, or each client application can actually create their own virtual workspaces. And you can create multiples of those. So if you want to aggregate, the bank fraud division for wire transfers and the bank fraud division for credit card with the e-commerce orders, so you can see all that data together, you can do that. And then when you actually process a case or notable, it's doing so in the respective workspace for real. So it just provides a little bit extra power there. I already talked about the risk assessment breakdown, data validators. It is distributed computing, like I said. So your clients, which is the desktop application, are actually doing some of the background processing for you. So rather than making Splunk server, which has probably already got loads of RAM and huge disk space, getting filled up already, why make it do more work while simultaneously hosting a website for the Splunk agents to access? Why not relieve a little bit of the pressure off of the server itself? Maybe it can actually process through some of that backlog a little faster, and instead let some of the processing happen directly on the client. So like I said, each workspace opens up a background worker with inside the application and starts processing queued jobs. So as long as I'm allowed access to that particular workspace as an analyst, I'm able to process background jobs. And as I process background jobs, those are immediately sent off as push notifications to the other clients who are also connected, so they don't have to reprocess that. They get the distributed effort of computing that I have. So again, one of the benefits of being offline, or I should say off the browser and directly into a desktop application. We do plan to support like PagerDuty, so not only push notifications about like data being transferred back and forth between clients, but PagerDuty being that you're away from your desk And so you want to still get alerts, and specifically certain types of alerts or certain thresholds of alerts. And you might want to be communicated with via push notification so you can get it on your watch, or you want to get it as an email directly, notifying you about something, or text message, or however you want. You can even ping a third-party web API or hit it directly into Slack channel. So wherever you want the information to be alerted to, that way, you may not have to run a team 24/7. Maybe you can have somebody on pager duty and they can be going about their regular life schedule, and they work from home or something, and so as soon as they get a pager, something important's happening, they can jump right back into SIEMplicity, and there it is sitting waiting for them to be processed. Team chat, many people use Slack and all these other tools, but if you don't have a real-time communication solution, having a team chat built directly in with workspace settings or channel settings for both the workspace, the connection, so you can talk about anything going on that particular search head, talk about anything going on as far as a particular workspace, even a particular case. So you can just talk with people who have been interacting with the case. You can create ad hoc group channels, just invite somebody to talk with somebody, and supporting both chat, as in text-based chat, but also audio, basically push-to-talk chat, so you can feel a little bit more close to your team if you're working remotely. Action subscribers, as I mentioned, those are those third-party call-outs. So if you have data systems outside of Splunk and SIEMplicity that you want to interact with, and you want to keep them informed, like I mentioned, an order came in, Splunk churned all the data, got all that data, you guys have the searches running, it found that data, then it generated a search result, SIEMplicity came in, enriched it, validated all the information, assessed the risk, identified the risk was severe enough to open a case, and it recommended that you go ahead and mark it as fraud. And then the fraud was marked. That system can immediately take on action to any subscriber, such as the e-commerce website itself, to, like I said, cancel the order, do a charge refund if the charge was already there, and then continue further on with communicating with authorities if necessary to investigate further. So action subscribers are really powerful for those who are doing business workflow, and that's really where Artisans Collaborative as a company specializes, is in business automation and writing software for that. I mentioned embedded search. You can do lots of powerful searches as part of our roadmap. I'll talk a little bit about configs. Everybody likes security, so different applications, especially servers, a lot of times they just host the config file and it's just in like plain text, because if you can get access to the server, then you probably deserve to be there. But what if somebody gets access to something like running on a local machine or on a shared VPN, or a VPS type server situation? So now those configs are readily accessible to anybody who has access to that server in general. So you put a little bit more effort then on the sysadmins and the DevOps teams to secure the environment. We take a little different approach and we say, how about we just encrypt the file to begin with, so that only SIEMplicity can talk to it. Makes it a little simpler. A way if anybody tries to modify the config, change credentials or anything like that, we know, because it would completely invalidate the file and they wouldn't be able to use it, and they're reset back to 0. But at the same time, we want to make it easy to share config files. So I already mentioned we have the ability to import and export files, and those can even be shared in the encrypted way, so that you have to have a password to actually install them. So again, nothing going over the ether that's not actually encrypted. Backup and restore of workspaces. Somebody was talking earlier about backups and the need to do backups. We take that, important to do backups. Since we are using Splunk right now with the KV stores as our data solution, if those go down for some reason, or break, or whatever, that'd be bad news. You might lose out on a bunch of notables. So you can configure backups, and you can export those backups. You can also make them restore them. So if you wanted to, like, let's say you were setting up a brand new Splunk, and you just wanted to back up all the data that was part of SIEMplicity, and you wanted to do it on a fresh install, but you wanted to pull all SIEMplicity's data over to it, you could just export all that and import it, and you have all your data with you. Or just you want to make an archive and then delete everything just because you're done with that division. Maybe you shut down a whole division of the company or something, but you want to have a retention of all the data. Any of the data that SIEMplicity creates, we have a backup of. Automated backups.
So that doesn't mean that whatever backend might exist. You mean you have a backup. SIEMplicity
Sorry, yes.
allows you to have a backup. You don't mean that there's some SIEMplicity backend that has all of your data.
Currently, there is
That's
no.
what it sounded like.
Yes. Thank you for clarifying. Currently, SIEMplicity. So we're on your side of the table,
Right.
right? We're with you. SIEMplicity is you. It's us. We're all part of the same company at this point. SIEMplicity doesn't have a backend currently. The only reason we need a backend service is for coordination of like push notifications and stuff that basically your backend services like Splunk doesn't support. So if you
and for like whatever kind of licensing models end up being done,
Yeah.
obviously there's going to be some.
Yeah.
Whatever it is.
So the data is yours. It's on your systems of your choosing. If you want us to host it for you, we'd host it for you, and then you would have a backup of the data we hosted. But that's, again, choices you make based on how you want to configure SIEMplicity. I already mentioned workflow modes, filtered views. Filtered views is also saved filtered views. So let's say you design a nice filtered view of this particular data for this particular workspace, and you kind of come back to it a lot of times. So you're looking through a bunch of notables, and you want to see it sorted on first based on created date, then priority, then risk, and I also want to filter it down to only see certain types of things like warning, notice, and emergency level type severity. You can configure all those search options and then save that as a preset. So if you come back to the workspace, you can just select that again, and boom, you have it. And those saved filters can be shared amongst your team or amongst your workspace or amongst your connection by just simply exporting and importing. So easy to manage. I already talked about most everything else. Documentation and training. We try and take a very focused effort on making sure that it's a new product. It's a new idea. It's a new take on something that has long been existing. So we know that people are going to be somewhat resistant to it. People just resist change. Also, there's going to be quirks and weird things that we didn't account for. So we want to have that sort of dialogue, but we want to provide proactively good documentation of every feature and current documentation for every feature, as well as documentation with each version of the application. So since we're following SIEMver, we're going to be making patch releases that don't break anything. We're going to be making minor releases that don't break anything. So we'll have major upgrades which might introduce breaking changes. But if we're doing our job right, then we're making those breaking changes automatically roll forward. So as long as you're staying forward movement, you won't actually have a breaking change. We should be able to automate the transition from one version to the next major version very easily. And so if there is any sort of quirks or any sort of configuration settings and changes that have to be made, we want to document those and make those available to you, as well as provide training and other forms of services so that you guys can feel comfortable using the application. Now's the best time as any, I guess, to talk about the pricing, because it's usually where people start asking some questions.
Who's ready to buy?
Yeah.
$1,000 right now. I'll auction it.
It's not ready for sale. We are still working through monetization scheme, but as part of SIEMplicity's goal for analysts, which analysts a lot of times don't deal with the purchasing of licensing and whatnot anyway, the big thing is that it's simple and it's flexible. So we're wanting to make sure that is affordable for every organization who's using Splunk. If you're using Splunk, we want you to use SIEMplicity. So we're going to offer very generous evaluation periods and trial periods with full access to all the features, so you can evaluate it to your heart's content. You don't have to be kind of locked out of things that are only available if you actually are subscribed. That said, it is a seat-based license, so no data-based license. It's not based on how much data you use or workspaces you configure or anything like that. All that data is stored in Splunk anyway, so why double dip on the pricing there? But it is per seat, and it's based on either a monthly plan, a yearly subscription. And the other thing is just like as software developers, we like to own our software. We don't like to rent everything. So if you want to buy the software as is, you will get a 1 year of upgrades, at which point you can upgrade all the way through any major version changes and everything. But at the end of that year, then you're on your own, and there's no more free upgrades. So if you want to upgrade, you just pay for the license again, and you continue going forward. It's a really simple way, and we're really looking at it as the software is something that's going to be a value add to your business, so it pays for itself in just how much time it saves you and how much better your analysis of risk and security events are. And then we do have the premium marketplace, which would be where you could, we work with integrations and different teams who are integrating Splunk into different businesses. Chances are what you're doing in your business is very similar to what other companies are doing, and if there's a general tool that can be developed that you can plug in to do validation or lookups and provide certain sort of risk assessment tools and intelligence to your business, then that would be part of the premium marketplace. And of course, we don't shut anybody out of that, so the same tools that are available in the marketplace, you could develop yourselves. If you have a development team, there'd be plenty of documentation on how to create your own validators. So that's SIEMplicity. And a big thanks from me to you for listening. Any questions, comments, thoughts, hates, love it?
I want to make sure that if you guys would like to participate in, like I said, it's somewhere between alpha and beta, my understanding. If you want to participate in this at all, make sure you give Daniel a business card or have him write your name or information down. This is his one opportunity to meet all of them. I mean, there might be another one.
I mean,
This is the main
yeah.
opportunity for you guys. You came, some of you guys I know came here just for this, right? Some of you came just because you always come. And some of you came because it was just across the street.
How many of you are analysts in here that actually do an analyst type role?
There's two. Three, four.
So what is everybody else then?
Nobody's gonna be
So
first.
the thing is, once this goes to market, you can be like, that feature's there because I thought it was a good idea. You know, because like it was pointed out in the very beginning, this tool isn't for sysadmin. It's just for analysts, really. You know, so whatever makes your life easier. You know, we don't do a analyst role on a daily basis, so we could be overlooking something that would really just change your life or your day-to-day operation. That's the kind of stuff we really want to know about. That sort of thing. So, you know, if you want to get your ideas out there and somebody listen, we'll listen.
Was there anything that wasn't clear or you had a question about?
Just a question. So you mentioned some use cases like wire fraud detection, predictive kind of thing. Does this simplicity have other use cases? Or
So yes. Well, I mean that's kind of like the easy example to give. It was part of some actual documentation that Greg shared with me about one of the use cases that people have for SIEMs. This actually can be used in a lot of different ways. It can be used as an identity protection system. So if you have an identity manager or provider as part of your business and you need to track logins and logouts and like IP address locations that are new and things like that. He was mentioning about the Smart Safe. It's by Motorola. So we developed this application for Motorola, and we built the hardware, the software, the whole back end, the whole front end, the mobile apps, everything. And within about, 6 months of operation of it being publicly available and people purchasing, we had a very, very large, and I can't name it due to the ongoing lawsuit that they're involved with, but a very large white hat team decided to do a penetration test of our systems. And our system followed the SIEMplicity model, even though we weren't using Splunk, we weren't using any sort of SIEM software. Our application by default, just because we were engineers and we know how to make things intelligent, so we had it tracking those sort of behaviors, and it identified these professional penetration testers very early into the process. And we were able to monitor them, and if anybody knows anything about penetration testing, you let them get in a little deeper. Secure it, but make sure they're getting in a little deeper, get a little bit more information about them. So we allowed them to go in a little deeper, and we captured even more data about them, and were able to report them to the FBI. It turned out to be a white hat. We didn't know that at the start. We just thought it was another bad actor. And the same sort of concept is being played here. So even in an identity management system, what they did immediately was they started signing up with new email addresses. Well, we started seeing all those new signups kept coming from the same IP address. And then they started shifting around their IP address, but we started identifying their same browser. So this is all log data that we're analyzing, just like what Splunk would ingest. But the rule system that we had in place is actually somewhat the brainchild, if you will, of SIEMplicity being at play. So I'd say that this has applications in many ways. It's just a matter of envisioning those applications. And I'd have to talk to know more about your particular business need to see if SIEMplicity would even be a good fit. But if it's a good fit for Splunk, SIEMplicity is like supercharging it because it's just adding things that Splunk doesn't have or just doing it in a way that Splunk doesn't do it. And it doesn't mean SIEMplicity has all the same tools either. There are going to be things that you can only do in Splunk or in your other backend because they're unique to the syntax of the language or the way that the data is ingested. From my understanding of Splunk, and again, I'm not an expert in it, it's all about unleashing your data. And to that extent, it's about not having to transform other systems. You have to transform all this into a certain type of data, then you can search it. Splunk's ability is that it can search anything, anywhere, anytime. So that power in and of itself if that's beneficial to your business, SIEMplicity is just going to add to that without taking away.
Now, speaking of Splunk and SIEMplicity, if you add like saved searches in Splunk, can you add them there and they show up in SIEMplicity?
Yes. So anything you created inside of Splunk would show up inside of SIEMplicity, including workspaces, including saved searches. You can access, so your searches can actually be written to access the collections that SIEMplicity creates. So we would not recommend that you go modifying those collections because you would break SIEMplicity, which would invalidate whatever warranties and licensing agreements we have anyway. But you can read from them, and by reading from them, you could, maybe looking into notables, you could have your search in real time evaluate what's going on inside the notable stack.
The way, so I made a bunch of suggestions to Daniel about how this might enter organizations and how a very smooth side-by-side evaluation might be made. And so I think in every project we've worked with to either do ES or custom SIEM, there's already an application, and inside that, a Splunk application, whether it's ES or something else. And inside of that, it already has a bunch of rules, and they're already firing and doing stuff. And so the easiest installation is you create a connection, you say, I want everything from that's currently firing inside of this app to become a notable in my system, and then you start going through and saying, so that's like 10 clicks, and you've got a side-by-side system, so it's firing into ES or Alert Manager or whatever, and it's also firing into your system, and then you even without doing the risk scoring or anything else, you now have, in just like 10 clicks, you have an identical side-by-side system, and you can handle cases over there, and you can handle cases over here, completely independently. You can say, well, which way do I like better? Which way is smoother or easier for me? Because it forks it off, right? And you already have the saved searches, right? It's just putting the notables in a different place. And by having it, you can further segregate it, say, I want my admins to evaluate it, and I'd like my analysts to evaluate it, and I'd like my business, you create 3 different workspaces. So you can actually have
And
4 side-by-side, one side-by-side trial across 3 different teams going at the same time in just a few clicks.
Yeah.
I think that's exactly what will happen is people say, I don't know, let's give it a try. Right? Download, what do you have to lose?
That's the key right there. What do you have to lose? So you try SIEMplicity out. Let's say you run it side by side for 3 months. Some analysts use it, some analysts don't, whatever. And you created all this data. The data can be exported into basic formats that can then be ingested back into Splunk, so you didn't lose anything. And simultaneously, while it's being generated inside of SIEMplicity, it can be firing directly into Splunk alongside of that anyway. So you have a duplicate of data. So as long as you have plenty of disk space available and plenty of processing power, it's not really at loss at all. So even if you wind up hating SIEMplicity, which I don't think you will, if we're listening to you, you won't hate it. You'll come to love it. Even if it's not right first, it'll eventually get there. So at some point though, if you need to move to some other system, but what's really nice is, let's say that you need to, let's say you're not on Splunk and you're moving to Splunk. You just took over another division at another company. Your company's merging together, and so you have 2 completely different DevOps teams that have to now get along. And they have to merge all their systems together, and they have to merge all the logs together, and they have to merge their SIEM teams together. Now you've got this problem of, well, how do I get the data out of that old one? Well, what if you just booted up SIEMplicity with the other connection? So let's say it was Elasticsearch or something, even something basic like a syslog. And that's all you have. You got Splunk, the V8 engine over here, and you got a little 2-cylinder, cranking along over here. With SIEMplicity, it doesn't matter. They're both kind of the same solution. They're both generating notables. They're both generating cases. They're both creating workflows according to those specific divisions. And then at some point you say, you know what, I want to export everything out of this 2-cylinder and give it the proper V8 upgrade it needs and import it directly over here. Now you've just merged everything over into the new workspace. Better than that, fire up a completely brand new, Splunk connection, and now you have 2 Splunks running side by side, load balance them, do whatever you like. You have more performance out of everything. That's kind of the idea with SIEMplicity. It's never to replace. It's never to take away from the power that you have with whatever your back end is, no matter how limited or how great it is. Any other questions? Concerns? Security stuff?
How soon will it be ready to run with other?
It's a great question. I don't have an ETA. I don't have an ETA on that.
I told him, you need to start with Splunk. But after that, it's gonna be somebody who says, I have a use case. Like, if you make it work with this and that, I'll buy it. Right? So, I asked him that, we talked about it before. He asked me, what do I think? I asked him, what does he think? We don't know.
So to clarify, was the question how soon you can use Simplicity at all with Splunk, or how soon you can use Simplicity with something other than Splunk?
With something other than Splunk.
Okay. It will be a soon-to-be-available demo.
We primarily use Splunk, but as we start running sales pitches to other organizations, they may have another preferred application, maybe Elk.
I mean, my answer was Logarithm because I'm involved in a MSSP selfishly, and it's legacy Logarithm moving forward Splunk.
I guess the
So
real
we need
answer
a
is
solution, but
marketplace is gonna drive.
Yeah.
that's the, yeah.
Yeah. So
Somebody's gonna be heavily interested, it's gonna be a deal breaker, and this will make their deal happen, and that's.
Some company probably, what I picture is some company that uses Splunk also uses something else a lot, like Elasticsearch or something else, and now they want to integrate both because they like how good it works
Because
with.
neither one's gonna go away, right?
Right.
You're stuck with both.
You're stuck with both. I do know, I used to work at IBM, and I do know that there's different divisions use different instances of Splunk, but then you have one analyst that has to monitor both applications of Splunk because that's what their division handles, is something like fraud. Now, this actually solves the problem. They don't have to log into two different Splunks to monitor the same thing. They can just literally log into one application, and which isn't something you can do in Splunk today.
Yeah, I think that use case is gonna ring probably almost everybody in here.
Yeah, it's not gonna be tied into Splunk necessarily.
It's gonna be 2 Splunks or 3 Splunks.
Well, then it's
way
Splunk.
before it's gonna be Splunk and something else.
It could be Hawk and McAfee and something else.
Yep.
Logarithm.
Yep.
So, I mean, Splunk is a vehicle right now, but that's not necessarily the general use case.
Yeah, you saw in the app, I can jump out of Simplicity and open the console without you having to think about what was the URL address to that, what was my login password with that. Just jumps right out over to it, which makes it a lot simpler. You've already logged in. We already know where the console is. Just open that thing back up. So if you do have to ever get back into the back ends, at least we're taking it maybe one level of thought out of it to make it a little simpler for those who are working in multiple systems. And again, the virtual workspaces, being able to aggregate data across connections, which is, again, like search heads, across the different servers, makes it really powerful because if you are, let's say, doing an acquisition, and this happens in bigger companies, of course, as you do those acquisitions and mergers of divisions and of companies, then you have these two different systems, and you have some person, though, who's managing the merger, so they have to be able to see both systems at the same time. That virtual system allows them to continue to operate separately, but to be seen together as one.
Multi-tenancy is not something Splunk handles well. They just.
It's a tough problem.
It is
and-
a hard problem,
and-
especially if you go multi-vendor, so that's.
Yeah. When you unhinge from Splunk itself, then more multi-tenancy problems occur. So that's where Simplicity is kind of coming in as the multi-tenant solution. So if you have multiple, or you're evaluating, because that's the other thing. I don't know that Splunk's the best for me, or I don't know that maybe I'm an elk and I'm looking at Splunk. I just want to try it out. I want to see if it's better. Simplicity lets you see it's better without compromising your workflow.
Yeah, I was just gonna make a comment. I think it's a good idea that you have, this is just a desktop application that's connected. Because some people I think will look at that and go, well, why don't you have a long server and then all those agents connect to that server and they can kind of do everything there. But I think it's a good idea to keep it how you are doing with the desktop application because, like they mentioned, you get to that someone wants to create a Splunk environment over here, well, then all of a sudden someone's like, well, we already started one over here, but like, well, we don't like how you're doing it, and then yours is just that single point to tie everything together. Because I think it will never stop if it was like a client-server model. Right now we have our SIEMplicity set over here. Oh, well, we don't want your SIEMplicity that way, we want to create a little one. So I think it's a good idea that you guys, with the desktop app, you think of it like email. You can have 50 email accounts where you've got Gmail, Office 365, Yahoo,
Hotmail.
Whatever, your own, and you have it in one system all coming in, so I think it's a good idea.
Yeah, it makes it really powerful. You get other capabilities besides native performance. I don't know how many of y'all know how browsers work, but browser creates a sandbox that locks you in and gives you a certain level of performance so that the rest of the operating system has plenty of resources. By installing an application, I'm not hinged by that, so I can give you as much power as you basically need to run all this stuff. At the same time, though, we get some unlocked capabilities. I can work directly with networking and other facilities of the operating system, which gives you push notification capabilities, and I can actually run a database inside a SIEMplicity app so that the client itself is syncing that. We can run an offline mode, so even if the internet goes out, well, you're not going to get new alerts coming in. Any actions and changes you're making with inside SIEMplicity can be synced, and so then when your internet comes back up online, you merge it in, you're good to go. I don't know if anybody else was affected by a power outage, but when power goes out around here, the internet goes out too. So, a good solution to some of those workflows that impact businesses, especially security businesses. What's missing? I got a long roadmap, but I want to make sure everybody has I need this feature.
I've only met a few analysts that weren't highly opinionated. There are a few, and usually they hate a couple of things about their workflow. That's why this project is, I think, gonna ring true. But if you guys don't say anything, you're not gonna get your pain point addressed. You gotta hate something about your workflow.
Yeah. What's something you didn't like? If you can't think of something you need to add, what's something you think is a waste of time, low priority? It's stupid. You didn't like it. Like what's something like that?
One of the things that I did see, you were talking about checking the emails, just use this as an idea for an example, making sure that it's valid in your document, using your regex, so you just document format.
Well, there's two things you can check on an email. You can check that the format structure is valid format structure by the RFC. And another thing you can do in a potential add-on is that it's an actual valid email at Google, or it's an actual valid email at Yahoo.
Yeah.
So you could actually ping the Yahoo server and check that back that it's a true user account.
So this is the logic.
Can you interface into those and say?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. So this is the one that's built in right now. This is what's technically called an entity. Now it's not currently in there. I was rushing to try and demonstrate this particular capability because email and IP address are two kind of examples that come up a lot of times that people want to know about. So I wanted to make sure that, hey, I had a regex expression example and that I had an actual third-party webhook, so I'll show you that in a second. This is the actual regular expression. If you know anything about email, you know that the regular expression for official standard is really widespread, and you can use that, and it's way bigger than what you should. This is the one that catches 99.9% of valid cases, and it's a lot shorter, and it discards a bunch of stuff that's kind of stupid. But to your point, I want to look up, it has to be an email within my system. So if it's an email outside of my system, or it's not one of the well-known, maybe it's so I mentioned earlier about the Motorola incident. One of the things that they did was they went to a Russian email website and they signed up with a Russian email. That was back when politics was, well, I guess politics is still going on about that, but it was at that time. They were probably just thinking, I'll just do something silly and make it look like Russians are hacking in. Well, they signed up with this thing. Well, I can blacklist the entire email domain. So now this isn't just doing a simple regex to see if it's a valid email format. It's actually going to look to see, is it one of the many email domains that's allowed or disallowed. So again, that blacklist, whitelist, watch list, that's where it comes in more for that. But you can also create your own custom validators so that, or let's say it's a password. And that's a bad example because you shouldn't be collecting passwords. What's a better example than a password? Something that would have to have a special formatting to it, right? So, some sort of configuration.
Let's say it's an order number.
Okay, yeah, there you go. That's a great example. Like a purchase order has to be in a certain format.
Database that has all the order numbers in it.
Yeah.
Let's say I have a guy who's requesting a refund or something, or a whole bunch of refunds. You know, the fraudsters do that all the time. They do an order, they do a refund, and they keep the stuff, or like all kinds of stuff like that. The whole point of this is you can, it doesn't have to be a public thing, right? This is your workflow. You work at this thing. You only care about orders. You don't care about credit card numbers, or, I mean, you get this one thing that's, you lose $1 million a year on this one stupid thing, and it happens within 1 minute. If you don't catch it within 1 minute, you lost the money, right? So you want this thing to validate in the system and come back and cancel it, right? You can set that up. There'll be some development cost.
Yeah, once you get to a certain level, you're going to have, so we provide hooks, if you will, webhooks, so that your systems can receive data and then respond back with the action that our system is supposed to take, which then in turn further fires off to your system or to other systems. So there's always these hooks into everything that's going on inside of SIEMplicity. Your system can be notified and handle in real time, just like our system does. But we plan to ship with built-ins, so for some very common things, but then you're probably going to want to customize that. So example, an email, I can validate a valid email, and I can probably even provide a lookup against a public database of spam emails or fake emails or whatever, or bad actor emails that's available. But for your business, you might also think that a particular email type or a particular email domain is not allowed, or a particular country. For example, one of the things is like
I was thinking more in terms of, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I was thinking more in terms of having hooks to connect with sites that actually detonate that email address and try to make it, see if there's a response to it.
Okay, yeah, so like an MX server lookup.
Yeah,
Yes,
that's what
you
I
can
was-
do that.
That's what I was saying.
So that would be more analogous to what this does. So the IP address uses the free GeoIP JSON lookup, and it actually processes the IP address against that. And then when it comes back, it actually checks the regex expression also for the IP address, because the third party doesn't do that. But that's where I got the city, the latitude, and longitude, is because it actually checked that information for me. So you'd be hitting off. Yes.
Katera will go out there to the.
It'll do that. It'll tell you whether or not the email is valid, whether I can send to it, receive from it, whether it's got the right headers and everything else on the right DNS settings, and then come back.
A lot of your time, you get your alerts, and then you got to say, okay, you got to go with the reputation check on the IP. If you're doing any kind of a.
So,
and all of that's already done. You
Yeah.
look here,
And that's the
look,
enhancements.
check mark, check mark, check mark, check mark, risk score, risk score, risk score, risk
And
score.
add to that, like I mentioned earlier, sometimes valid data is valid now when it was created, and if we never check it again later, then it could become invalidated in between. So one of the things that we do is, besides the fact that it's all built on an event-driven system, just like Splunk creates all these events, we also create all of them. We have an immutable data store, so you're never, even as an analyst, deleting data. You're not destroying data. You're always adding more actions. So there's a perfect audit trail. But the other benefit is, if you can have it, the system set where you can run the validators, because some of these validators could be expensive. I mean, sending out and checking an MX server or something like that might take seconds. You don't want to be delaying stuff because it takes seconds to go and process. So you would fire that job. You don't do that in the search. That's super expensive inside the search. You wait till the results get created. It's got the email. Now we have a notable, because our system picked up on the notable. Do we want it to go ahead and enrich it immediately, or do a validation check against MX records immediately? Or do we want to do it only when the notable moves from being a notable to a case? So by the time the caseworker gets in there and looks at it, then the case has the valid information. Do we want to just manually do it, so they have to press a button in order to do it? Of course, we're going to save every time that they do that, so we'll have an immutable log of, okay, well, it was valid here, and then it became invalid here, because they reran it. Or every time the page is loaded, literally, maybe it's cheap, it's in a regex expression or something. Every time I see this value, always check to see if it's valid. Because maybe I release an update to some built-in or some premium add-on that has a new regex expression that it would consider it invalid. So now it's actually changed its value. So those are the kind of concepts of, you have manual mode, basically auto mode, which is whenever a change to the data occurs, then it does it, and then you have only when it converts from a case to a notable, or sorry, from a notable to a case, and then you can also just have it reassess based on changing dynamics of the case itself. So if you added a new comment, that's probably not going to change anything, but if you added another notable, now I have two notables, that might impact the actual risk score or validation of it. So your API calls all come into that, and your third-party systems can be developed to do it. I give you the full notable as a webhook payload. You give me back the full response that I need to enrich. So it's a very simple thing. You can give me additional risk. You can give me additional values. You can give me further lookups to perform even. So I can chain together additional lookups. Very powerful.
You can say convert it to a case or.
Right. You can respond back to me and tell me, cancel the order. That might be a predefined hook within SIEMplicity, so that when a case is resolved, email is maybe not a good example. Maybe it's like what would be an example of why you would need to check the MX records for, just so I have a concrete.
Well, I think email is a good thing. You may also want to check it for ILCs or domains that are malicious domains.
Okay.
That are going out. Somebody's generating a lot of MX records, for example. Why is that? Is that a PGA going inside your system or something?
Okay. So checking any of that sort of stuff. Some of it can be expensive lookups. So if you are trying to do that all in real time, you want your system to receive the information so your system can perform the check. Then your system responds back, and if it's part of your domain, you might just respond back with the data. I might then have it configured that if I get this type of response, like an invalid, that there's an automatic action that occurs to close out the case, or whatever that means. So if it means cancel the email subscription, or whether it means cancel the changes that are trying to be applied. Somebody was changing DNS records, and you wanted to verify, why is this being changed from this IP to that IP address, and with this IP address is bad actor. It's on a known list. So I need to look up the DNS records, find out where it traces all the way back to, or something like that. All of that sort of work might be costly, but you want to run it in real time so you can immediately take action.
But a lot of that's available if you have hooks into, like DNSlytics, for example, give you a lot of that kind of information. It'll give you how long the domain's been up, like when was it renewed, and so you get a lot of that information. So it just came up 2 days ago. It's probably a little bit more suspect than if it was there 10 years, right? So
right.
You have your way of looking at that. The idea is you don't have to waste your eyes and your brains doing it. You program it once. Maybe you hire them for a day to build this thing in, to do this risk calculator or this action escalator.
Well, the flexibility,
And it happens every time,
flexibility
right?
has to be built in though, to do that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This is going to have
That's what would be like a
force
plug-in validator. So like when you looked at the premium marketplace, one of the features in the long run is a marketplace. So somebody could write a DNS validator, right? This is basically what you're doing. And you could install that validator into your SIEMplicity app, and it would go to dnsvalidator.org and validate that DNS and enrich your data set with that information.
Because as an analyst, I spend a lot of time gathering crumbs. And that takes a lot of time, and it takes time to train analysts to know where to look for the crumbs, to start gathering them.
If you
Right.
have
But if you could write that
standard
crumb
basic
one
run
time.
sets that you could have done automatically for you.
Yeah.
I see two types of users for this kind of thing. One is the multi-tenancy user that they've got some kind of multi-tenancy problem that just there's no solution for. A bunch of users are going to be like that. A bunch of other users would say, our analysts spend 10% of their time doing this thing, that there ought to be some way to automate so that it's right there for them.
Or it's just a simple low-hanging fruit.
There will be some that need both, right? But
you
your
both
pain
intend,
point
still
that's going
got
to get
those.
you in, you're going to have one of these two pain points, and you're going to say, I gotta have this. If you
Yeah.
can just solve this,
And-
I'm in.
And
We have them both.
And to your point, there are a bunch of breadcrumbs lying all over the place, and a good analyst takes years of training to know where to look and where to find them. What the idea would be with SIEMplicity, and how to interpret them, that's also important, is SIEMplicity's job is to work with analysts like yourself, find those solutions, those breadcrumbs. Where are they normally found? And if there are ready-made solutions available that can plug directly into the data we're generating already, then at least we're getting this. We're telling SIEMplicity where to go to find the breadcrumbs. We get all the breadcrumbs in one place. Now, like you said, it's sometimes up to an analyst to know what it means. SIEMplicity's only real value add there is that as it learns your behavior as an analyst, it will start identifying, I don't really know what all these breadcrumbs mean, but I know I have these same breadcrumbs together, and he always flags it as this, and I have these same breadcrumbs together, and he always flags it as that.
Machine.
So maybe at some point it figures out that, hey, this is the normal analysis, and it suggests to you, hey, it looks like all this data, I just showed it all to you. You could go through and systematically double check it all, or you could take my predictive analysis and say, yeah, let's just go with that. Maybe you won't, maybe you will. But the idea is if you do start following that predictive analysis, you can actually train the system to get smarter and smarter and smarter. And it's part of machine learning and the kind of the craze of the future for handling these sort of repetitive tasks. Again, the machines don't know what analysts know. But if analysts continue to give them the data, they will slowly, very slowly, mind you, learn the behavior and hopefully get it better right. It's better to get it 80% accurate than to have it basically, I don't know, we'll have to have an analyst sit there for days on end looking over the information. And if it happens to be something that's important to be real-time based, waiting for an analyst, humans are just never as fast as a computer. So waiting for an analyst to come in and take a look at it, you might just be busy on something else. Whereas a computer, it can process multiple things all simultaneously. So there's a huge value to actually figuring out these validators, enrichers, and automating them. And from my perspective, I haven't seen a back-end solution. So that's not just Splunk, that's any of them. You might be using CloudWatch, Logarithm, any of these. They don't really deal with the business problem. They deal with the data problem. They deal with how to get breadcrumbs, but they don't deal with what the breadcrumbs mean. And SIEMplicity is trying to get closer to that front. Got to be something you guys didn't like, something you liked.
Well, it's not so bad I didn't like. I'm actually, it's more like a programming question.
Mm-hmm.
So you get distributed processing, which means you kind of have like this idea of distributed state. So how do you handle, or how does SIEMplicity handle dealing with like the race conditions that involve like so I process a notable and I upgrade its severity, right? Like, and then somebody else has like got another event or entity that like comes in and is like, oh well, actually this like would downgrade the severity. So how do you resolve those like such that they both wind up in the same state of the severity for that?
Version control.
Okay. Is it like based on timestamp? Like, are you going by
Micro timestamps, so you have down to the microsecond precision. But an event log of who made events first eliminates most race conditions. So the true race condition would be two people who did the exact microsecond precision thing that are in conflict. But the simple conflict resolution there is that neither of those changes apply, and it flags up as an admin to deal with. Now, I'll say that the chances are of two analysts working on the same notable or the same case is a management problem because they should be assigned to somebody. No, well, so the workers pull off a queue. So they claim a job and nobody else claims that job until that job either expires or is released.
You mentioned though that like the output, like as it processes a job that may impact other notables, right?
Correct.
So yeah, that was more what I was making. Like, so I pulled two separate jobs.
That would be queued as another job to be further processed. So when one job finishes and the
if
notable.
Something out about that job, like during executing the job, then I fire off another job that essentially would be the thing that would modify the notable, like the severity for it.
Correct. So would that background job worker have a race condition with an actual human being who's also modifying the edit state at the state at the exact same time? Again, it could happen, but chances are not likely. We're not going to create atomic locking and all that sort of behavior, but you do have that event log. So you would just simply see the machine applied this status, and then right at the same basic time, an analyst applied something else. So it would kind of give weight to the machine because the machine is doing things for the analyst. So the other aspect though is I would not have my own background workers working on my cases. The background workers don't really work on the notables as much as they work on the jobs which are transformed into notables. But once it's in the notables, for the most part, that's now in the analyst's hands. There are things that the analyst can fire off to be done, but they would not be in race condition with what that analyst is doing. And no other analyst should be working on those cases or notables at the same time. There should be, unless it's collaborative, they should be delegating or reassigning so that there's one primary person working on it. Okay. So some of this is what should be done from an outsider perspective, so that's where you guys are to correct me on these things. But I also work with lots of other companies in other industries that deal with human problems, but they deal with human problems of like just how to organize and manage workflow. And sometimes what we do as an organization, we say, that's not the way we want to do it. just because it's not the way you do it doesn't mean it's the way you should be doing it. So we're also trying to nudge people into, hey, you know, you really should be assigning cases. You should have a manager assigning cases. You shouldn't have just analysts picking willy-nilly which ones they want. You know, you can have that power, but realistically, that's it's not energy efficient for your organization from a human perspective. It might work the way the analysts kind of got trained and how they do with things, but it's not actually a good workflow. So
the I guess machine learning models, those are stored on the client side. Are they shared like through the collection in Splunk?
So they'll actually, yes, they'll be stored through the bridge. Some machine learning is going to be part of the premium feature, which will be part of the centralized SIEMplicity servers. So those also have to be multi-tenant. So they have to be for certain people and they don't have to be for other people. Some people are like, I don't care, it's like the login system, it's not a big deal. Other people are like, it's the, yeah, they need to get the fan on in here or something.
It's way cooler out here.
Yeah, just open the door, it's fine. So you know, you get multi-tenant. Other people, they're like, no, I have to have this running only on my private servers in my own data center that I created in my basement, kind of concept. Like some people are super protective about their data, other people aren't. We're probably tending more to the people who are not so concerned about some of the notables and things that are going on. But that said, all of this can run within a private cluster. So if the price is right, we can deploy the entire infrastructure to yours. We currently host all of our stuff. Again, SIEMplicity doesn't currently have anything, but as far as Artisans Collaborative, most of all of our clients, we host everything through Amazon Web Services and have instant deploy services. So as far as creating a brand new infrastructure for somebody, it's not really that hard. And that's kind of the whole point, is we want to embrace modern.
So then is all the machine learning offloaded into like a server environment?
As much as possible. And that's where you
Splunk servers. So it's like,
well, so it's two-factor, because again, I want to put data where you want it. So if you want the data and the machine learning to be running in the Splunk server, we can do that. You'd have to deploy an agent, has to run in the Splunk server. Likely, though, it makes more sense to have distributed computing, and so the actual computing model is happening on the client side. So it would be deployed with our client app. And there would be a machine learning app.
separate from the client app?
It would be a background service worker.
Okay.
So when you install the client app, SIEMplicity, you get the machine learning parts built in.
Right. Oh, okay. So by default, it's on the client side. There may be components that get.
Data is always stored up in wherever the data server is. Now, again, I could even store the data locally.
Location.
Yeah.
Data's in a central location, the learning algorithm is processed on the client side.
It's processed, but the actual knowledge base, basically the training data and the result data is pushed back up to the data central. So again, that's where there can be race conditions on that data, but there won't be.
Yeah, so that question is more just interesting that like if you're learning the responses over here, making sure that the model that's generated, like the statistical model that's generated, winds up over on analyst B and analyst C.
Yes, the statistical model is centrally stored and shared, and micro patch updates can be performed to it. But the reality is that machine learning algorithms don't dramatically change because of one piece of new data. So just because I mark something doesn't dramatically if it does, you have a broken model. So machine learning algorithms should actually be dealing with big sets of data. So even in that case, it might be 50 notables have to get processed before even a small change to the overall model occurs. But we'd actually probably reprocess the entire model apart from the current working effort.
Would that come down to like a job, like in the system?
Yes, and that's where the central servers for the premium paid services comes in. You're paying basically at that point for us to be doing some of the workload for you. If there's a way we can push that to the clients, we're going to, but at some point it does make sense to centralize. So, are you a solver developer yourself?
I spent a lot of time in ops, but I spent a lot of time with devs while I was in ops.
So you picked up things too?
Yeah. I spent probably entirely too much of my day reading hacker news.
You can get lost in there. They're in Reddit. Cool. Well, I think they're closing up, so. Greg, we done?